He flew past the monster and swung his sword with a single swing, hitting it in the neck, but the monster didn't even seem to notice. The guy was so fast that it was hard to follow his movements. He stopped and was breathing heavily. His heart was literally jumping out of his chest. The guy was at his limit. The zombie turned to him and looked at him over his shoulder. The monster didn't even seem to fully understand what had happened. The monster put out his hand to once again use his magic. He looked at him with his white eyes and prepared to deliver one last crushing blow. However, suddenly, the monster's head began to slide forward. There appeared to be a large cut that literally separated the monster's head from its body. Then another wave swept through, following the guy and finally killing the monster. The monster began to fall to the ground, its head falling off in one blow. With a loud sound, he fell to the ground. It was his last breath now. The monster was defeated. Han stood a few meters away, still in his fighting stance. He was breathing hard. He was having trouble concentrating. The poor guy was already barely on his feet. His muscles ached. He couldn't feel anything yet as his body was overflowing with adrenaline. The guy froze in place. Then he lowered his sword and it struck the blade directly into the stone floor with a loud sound. Even he drove a little bit there. The guy didn't have a single drop of strength after that. He had completely depleted his physical reserves. He was breathing heavily and trying to get his breathing in order. The magic that had overwhelmed him was leaving his body. This is how it ends. It was worth saying that this process was quite unpleasant. He started to feel dizzy. His strength was running out after all. His legs were having trouble holding him up. He couldn't control his body anymore and just started falling backwards. Damn it. Now there was only blackness in front of his eyes. As soon as the girls saw all this, they ran straight to him. The boy was lying on the cold ground, and he felt like he was dying. His whole body ached so much that he couldn't control himself. The boy was breathing heavily, and all he could do was roll his eyes. He'll rest for a while and later show all the traps and seals, so you just have to wait a bit. Even on the brink of death, he was dedicated to his work. He took the stamina potion, which he still had a little bit left, and brought it to his mouth. The girls looked at him with frightened faces. Charles said it seemed like he didn't have to worry about it. They didn't even do anything. Well, it's over now. The guy was sitting there, and he was thinking a little bit. First, he'd have to check the cube. A lot of signs popped up in front of him. They destroyed the awakened zombie with a sword. Excellent results. User Hansong destroyed a zombie with a one-handed sword. This achievement will go down in history. The two characters saved will remember it for a lifetime. Achievement rank: historical. They cleared the hideout of the awakened one. Secret rewards were found. S plus class space control cube. Attacking cube. Prevost magical energy brought internal damage injury recovered with a medium-level stamina potion. Strange luck activated. Physical stats increased slightly while recovering. Physical stats increased by some amount. Magical power and mental power increased. The main character has become attached to the user. The secondary character Charles has seen the user in a new light. Reputation points increased significantly. He reached for a few cubes that were lying right in front of him. One of them was a magic transformation cube. It looked like a small blue tetrahedral cube. He picked it up and he said he was going to take it for himself. Is everything okay? He looked at the girls with a surprised look. They both agreed. The girls threw, so they didn't mind. The guy looked at them with a bright smile. How hard it is to control the expression on his face. Basically, the confirmation of the item's level is obtained from the appraisal agency. So it won't be long before he finds out what kind of item he found himself. He held the small cube in his hands and continued to admire it. But he could easily spot the S+ rank space control cube among the other items by browsing the information. One would have to look at its beautiful shape to understand everything. Indeed, the cube looked impressive. The boy bent over and started looking at the remaining items. They could divide the remaining items now, or after they were graded. However, there was no desire to linger here anyway. In front of them, there were many items lying in front of them. There were cubes, various magic stones, potions, scrolls, and books. The girls stood around and looked at all of it in wonder. The guy started to swivel his head around. After all, the boss was already dead. But the dungeon still hadn't collapsed? How strange. He couldn't figure out what the reason was. So the answer came to itself. There are still objects and fragments that are the reason it still exists. He stepped back a short distance and looked ahead of him. The dungeon was big, too big. A wry smile appeared on his face. He will destroy every column here, every pebble, but he'll take everything he wants. The girls stood a little farther away and looked at him with incredulous glances. He was creepy now, after all. They stayed there for quite some time, because the boy wanted to take absolutely everything that was there. Soon, they went back to their places, and Han went to his dormitory. Now the guy was completely safe. He was lying on his couch and looking at the specs. You're at neural and skeletal recovery at. It'll take another hours to fully recover. He sighed heavily. Had he overdone it this time too? The sign he looked in front of him, and thought a little. It takes so much time to recover. Tomorrow was Monday, and he would have to go to class again. However, it was so lazy. He would love to sleep all day tomorrow. An artificial intelligence flew up to him and reported that the account linkage had been successfully completed. Basic processing complete. The guy nodded and said, "Could he show him the video?" The drone flew closer. The guy started looking through everything he'd filmed during the day. The appearance of these two girls has raised a lot of interest and attention, so you can't let the video go viral too quickly. The second video needs to be compressed a little bit and emphasize the boss. You need to insert pieces from the third video so that the attention shifted to the attributes of reinforcement, and the picture should be breathtaking. Artificial intelligence nodded if it had the chance. "I don't love you. I feel sorry for you." The guy sighed heavily and lay back on the bed. He had a lot of experience in making videos, and even when he hired assistants, he was relieved only after personally checking the final edit. Then he got out of bed. On the video about the attack image last practice had good feedback. He even cheered up after that one. That was great. He almost couldn't believe his ears. The video from the Easy Ogre Killing channel is getting attention. The video, Awakening the First Skill, is getting attention. He gained reputation points. He made up for the points he spent in the dungeon. We should look at the comments. The guy was incredibly pleased with his actions. With this amount of points, he would be able to easily buy a random box with random mid-level contents. That's just great. He was just beyond happy. He was finally starting to get somewhere. The guy was incredibly happy. Suddenly, he heard that notifications started coming to his messenger. The guy immediately opened the chat room. There was correspondence between Song Si-yeon and Charlie. The former said they could do what they wanted. The forensic results received. About Cuba. Why don't they get together? Charles asked. How about tomorrow night? The girl replied that she was free today, any time at all. Then they would see each other tomorrow. They seemed to have already decided everything for him. It ended well, but it was dangerous. The boy leaned back on the couch and exhaled heavily. He still couldn't recover from what had happened. However, there was one intrusive thought running around in his head that kept him from calm and relaxing properly. He sat on his couch and contemplated what was happening. He had only been able to avoid, through sheer luck, but they would definitely arise. Reputation level would definitely play a huge role in this. The more popular he was, the more problems he would have. He stood up and took a seat on the couch. The most dangerous characters right now are probably not Sion, since they're already well acquainted. He pondered even more, and what he realized made goosebumps start running down his back. However, it seemed to him that the guy was probably much more dangerous. He'd need a black card to prevent that. The guy's got his head in his hands. Not an easy task, but it would be better to use the ID cards that are accepted all over the world. However, even with all that, the task seemed impossible to him. There was a Coca-Cola can lying on the sidewalk. Someone swung around and hit that tin can with all their might. The tin bent and flew high into the air with a loud crunch. After flying a few meters, the tin went straight into a garbage can. Looks like someone was good at soccer. It was Keel, walking down the street, and he seemed to be waiting for someone, or looking for something. He looked puzzled, as if he was having a hard time. The guy pondered for a long time. Only Hong and Bayul annoyed him, but eventually there was someone who even they could overwhelm. When the guy thought about it, his face creased with hatred and irritation. It was obvious that someone had really pissed him off like that. Who would have thought it was our main character? Well, naturally, he could not remain without attention. The guy was rapidly gaining popularity, and it could not help but annoy. Keel walked around the circle and pondered in rage about how much he hated it. Appeared literally out of nowhere. Took first place. How is that even possible? Who is this guy? He's nobody by any name. He stuck his hands in his pockets. This guy's main weapon is a sword, but he has magic. Who the hell is he? The guy sighed heavily and tried to come to his senses. His fury was literally boiling over. Suddenly, someone approached him from the side. It was a girl with bright yellow hair. The guy looked at her, and his eyes reflected hatred. The girl asked what was wrong. However, the answer was self-evident. She started to say that from his sighs. The guy looked at her with surprise and annoyance. The girl seemed to be in good spirits. Always, appearances are deceiving. The guy looked at her. What was she up to? In his eyes for a second, except for understanding. He couldn't understand what the girl was trying to do. Julia smiled and said that she understood exactly how much it bothered him. There was something in her voice, however, and it wasn't right. Something was definitely going to happen. The girl looked at him, and a sly smile flashed across her face, the kind of smile one usually uses to plot some devious plan. All of this was definitely not easy to pull off. The girl smiled and squinted her eyes and said that she could help him. They started talking to each other very quietly, so that no one would listen to them. I asked him if he knew that magic circuits are really useless. The guy said it's not practical or functional, but magic has limits. He still wasn't thinking about anything but his hatred, yet he wanted to know what the wench was up to. It would take a great talent not to spend a lot of time studying the scheme, but to control the intended ones at once. The girl smiled and continued talking. Yeah, this guy's magic has its limit. In the end, he can't do anything other than her and wielding a sword, right? Keel looked at her, and after a bit of silence said, "What does she mean by that? What did she even want from him?" The girl was becoming more and more suspicious of him. Smiling, still in the same voice, she said that this guy had a very special background and didn't seem to have quite a lot of experience. The girl said she found the perfect place for him, in the Black Rose. It seems she's not as simple as she first appears. She's an unusual student. It seems she's been admitted there to recruit others. The guy looked at her with an incredulous look. It appeared to him more and more that this was some kind of bullshit. So she wants to humiliate him at the debut ceremony, or through Mockingjay put him down. The bastard is a completely conniving bastard. He thought about it, even if it would help him. He shouldn't do it. They were students, not monsters. He wanted to humiliate this upstart in front of everyone. Still, they made another plan. It would be best to target him with his own skills. With this ability, he would soon have it wouldn't be hard. He thought of his enemies. He will get anyone and everyone who gets in his way. It would be days away. The boy frowned and continued walking forward with a steady gait. Julia looked at him without much enthusiasm. This girl used everyone and anyone. She was ready to sacrifice any person for the sake of her interests and principles. The girl spared no one. She was like a snake that had stealthily fallen out for it from whence it came and was trying to muck everyone up. The girl looked at him thoughtfully. Did he seem to be thinking about something else? But she realized she couldn't seem to get anything more out of the guy, since he didn't want to, and she wouldn't insist. The girl flung her arms theatrically to the side. Keel looked at her with obvious distrust. She seemed to have a lot of bad thoughts going through her head. This was bad. He shouldn't have messed with her. But there was no way out. But he had no reason to stop her. Let her do what she wanted. The day continued to heat up. The weather was gorgeous, especially gorgeous for messing someone up. Events have moved to the Ability Simulator A. Many people came there every day, whether they were students or just people who wanted to practice their skills. They were buzzing around there like flies. Someone was telling something. Someone was just practicing. Our hero went there too. He was standing in the middle of the hall, in some incomprehensible figure, which outwardly resembled a semicircle, or rather a sphere that had been stuck into the ground. It was in this peculiar one that the ability training took place. There was a purple space near him. His identity was confirmed. Entering the training area extended space with the character invulnerability feature. The boy raised his head forward and began to look around. He began to turn his head in different directions. It was quite spacious, but the room looked strange. The whole place was purple, like he was in some retro game. He looked at his hand and clenched and unclenched his fist a few times. It seemed to him for a second that even his physical abilities had increased a bit here. Characteristics window. Muscular strength, magical strength speed, mental strength, dexterity, intelligence. 5. Endurance charm. 4. Sense luck potency, out of 1,000 unique skills. Enlightenment. Enhanced physical abilities. Special skills of viewing information and space control. He gained space control from a plus rank. From the beginning, he'd gotten a strong special skill. Amazing. He looked around again. The most important thing is imagination and spatial reasoning when working with something like this. If you have to use the skill in the direction of the given coordinates, it becomes almost a cheating skill. But first, the skill would have to be improved. The guy clenched his fist and prepared to practice. Not a second was to be missed. Suddenly, a quadrocopter flew up to him and informed him that he had a meeting scheduled for PM. The guy nodded his head and remembered that he'd made the appointment, or rather how he'd been dragged into it without his invitation. The drone continued to alert. He also has to auction off a set of attributes and fill out a patent application. The guy said he had things planned after returning to the dungeon. The guy started waving his hands and said that he understood everything. Let her say it all when the appointed time comes. The boy sighed heavily. This drone was a bit too annoying sometimes. A useful thing in a world like this, of course, but sometimes he was annoying. The guy got ready to practice. He put his hand out in front of him, and his whole body seemed to be covered in purple magic, similar to what Sion is covered in while using his ability. Aside from preparing for the rest of the story and getting the black card, there's a lot of stuff to do. There's definitely a lot to do here, but right now he's best to focus on the main pressing things. The same circle of energy that was in that dungeon where the zombie was immediately formed around it. It began to increase in size in proportion to its speed. The guy immediately threw some strange object at him, and the circle broke into 2 pieces. It was some kind of weird pebble. It was the same color as the space around it. The pebble flew a few meters and stopped. That's it. I guess that was it. Is it really that weak of a skill? The guy was even a little dejected. If that was the entire effect, it was by no means impressive. The boy clenched his fists. Well, that's the first pancake, as expected from such a small skill level. All right, I'd have to practice, and then maybe I'd get something out of it. He looked at his hand, which was trembling slightly from exertion. He couldn't dig properly. Even though he had perfectly visualized his fingers touching the ground before, it still went through his fingers. An uneven hole was his limit. He even felt a little ashamed of himself. The guy tensed up with all his might. In that case, he would practice until he could do it normally. He was determined as I wanted to give up for nothing. A purple aura began to appear around him again. He started creating these little holes just everywhere. The guy was trying his best. The level of the space control skill increased each time until he reached rank E. Finally, the mental power had increased by 2 units. This was a real success. The guy inside him was just jubilant with happiness. He couldn't believe that he had succeeded after all. There was a reason why he wanted to increase his skill level, especially on the training ground extended space. He had a sparkling smile on his face. He was standing in this weird empty space, and he looked happy in my opinion. The guy was incredibly happy about his accomplishment. He had finally made it. Then he coughed. He had to pull himself together. It wasn't over yet. There were a lot of levels. He had to try and finally get something sane. He looked at his hand, which continued to twitch slightly from the exertion. Indeed, this skill required a specific amount of strength, so he felt a little exhausted right now. He would need to raise his stamina level to fully utilize this skill. Well, that range is his maximum. A few meters away from him, another such plane appeared and began to change. It also took on the outline of a circle, and began to increase in proportion to the magnification. Space began to change literally before our eyes. There was a ball inside it, and it was as if space had been distorted. And now, it looked different. A pit began to appear. The guy was doing well. It looked mesmerizing. Something strange was happening here. The sphere that had begun to warp space itself had grown even larger, and strange waves were coming from it. They were spreading farther than one could imagine. This training ground realizes infinite space. When he controls a large chunk of space, it does not shrink completely. Everything here looks different from real life. However, here's a question. What if you keep it in that state? The guy continued to keep his hand at a distance, and maintain the state of the space like this. That might contradict the universe of this game. But if that was the case, it was obviously some kind of glitch or bug. The guy trembled, his body tensing up. He took a small bottle out of his pocket. Here's why. An empty potion jar, insulation 0. An empty bottle that could be broken if the inside was empty. There is magic insulation inside. From now on, it's not a bug, it's a cheat loophole he's aiming for. The guy kept holding the space near him and brought the can up there. He brought the jar closer to this piece of space and saw a small circle begin to move toward him. It looked so small here that he could have missed it if he had wanted to. A second later, a small ball, at least it looked like it, hit the jar and fell to the bottom with a loud thud. It felt like something glass had gone in there, like a ball that had been thrown in there. He did it! The guy tensed up, for this was the first time he had tried something like this. He immediately put the lid on the bottle so that this space wouldn't get out of there. The guy even tensed up a bit. He closed the bottle as tightly as he could, lest God forbid something bad happened. It's pretty dangerous stuff, so he'd need to keep it safely away from the others, so no one can't get their hands on it. Looked directly at his creation. Pride raged inside him. But he had finally succeeded. He had created an empty potion bottle with a rare grade space. They had made great progress. Rare class item creator. A sharp class item was created in a way that wasn't listed here before. The rank achievements are historic. The boy sighed heavily. It was hard to do, but he did it. There was no way to miss a moment like this. It was as if something inside had begun to blossom. That's going to make up my jar. That's great! Just great. Everything came out just as he planned, and he even got an achievement for it. I couldn't be happier about that. He could get a reputation as a researcher for this device. The guy glanced at the jar, and the thought crossed his mind that it wouldn't be a bad idea to become an alchemist or something. The value of this bottle depends on its use. Broken bottles, when they fall, release what's inside. The contents from containment magic. You can make a bomb by putting in a fire spell. It's pretty practical, like a grenade. Well, either like a Molotov cocktail, or put some healing magic in there and try to heal everyone around you. That should work. Prepared magic can be more effective than magic conjured on the spot. The guy looked at his bottle again. He held it with such trepidation as if it were his life's treasure. Even used like this, it would be powerful enough. He would need to prepare a couple more of these bottles, and then go back to the dungeon again. He hadn't found everything there yet. Last time the girls literally pulled him out by his feet because he'd been stuck there for hours. Soon, the boy was on his way back to his room. He was breathing hard after the ordeal, and needed to rest for a while to recover. He sat down next to the building, and decided to rest for a while. Looking through each level of the dungeon was quite tedious now. He collapsed on a nearby bench, and tried to tidy up. The hardest work is routine. It's so strange. He hasn't expended a single drop of energy, and he's already tired. Suddenly the guy heard someone approaching him. The footsteps were quite fast, so it was hard for me to realize that it was one of the girls. He wanted to rest, but no, he was not going to be alone. He realized almost immediately who it was. The voice gave the girl away. Yeah. She didn't seem to be hiding, which was a first. It was Shiyan who seemed to be in a slightly upbeat mood. What's wrong with her? The girl looked at the guy with a look like she was expecting something from him. Stretching into a smile, she asked when they would go on their assassination mission. Tomorrow night would be perfect. The girl was literally glowing with anticipation. The last words she said somehow mysteriously. And then the boy regretted that he had promised her then. He shouldn't have done that. Now he couldn't get away with it. He even squeezed his eyes shut against the girl's glow. The kid tried to get out of it and said she still had to practice her powers before the effect would wear off. And besides, he didn't really want to go. What a bad time for her to show up. Who asked her to come here? The girl thought about it and seemed to agree. Okay, that worked. I had to distract her with it so she'd stop bothering him. Se-young S asked with interest, then where will they practice? At the center. The guy interjected. At the center? What a stupid idea. Why go downtown for a simple workout? He could do it somewhere nearby so he wouldn't have to walk far, and besides, he was tired. The girl put her finger forward and said importantly, there are a lot of people there. The guy put his foot down and wondered, practicing in a crowded place. Well, the idea in itself sounds weird. He thought about it, and it seemed he was starting to get it. Yes, the purpose of this girl's training is quite specific. There are a lot of orders in the center, and it's easy to hide in the crowd, so that's what she's getting at. Well, no, it doesn't fit at all. The guy looked at her. At this time, the girl was looking at him with a waiting look. He had completely forgotten that this man's mind worked very differently. Well, that would be the difficulty. He held out his hand to her and began to speak calmly. Or rather, he tried not to lose his temper. He said the girl should train at the training center like other normal people. In the long-distance evasion area. That's normal practice, right? The girl asked in surprise. Is that right? Terribly embarrassed. It was clear from her voice that the girl was not ashamed. Suddenly, Charles the girl came up to them and waved her hand in greeting and seemed glad to see them. An overabundance of diminutive suffixes. Charles came closer at the same time and said hello. Did these two come early? Han was not in the best of spirits, and the girl noticed it. She immediately freaked out because she thought she was the problem. What's wrong? The girl asked him in a frightened voice. It's nothing, the guy replied in a callous voice. Let's start the distribution. They took out small magical items from their pockets. They sold the unwanted items and divided the rest. The attack cube releases invisible energy that can be used as a weapon. Wind cube allows you to control the flow of wind through your senses. Time to distribute items. Even a glance is enough to match the owner to each one. You got it right. Se-young got the attack cube and Charles got the wind cube. You can see from their faces that they're happy with the items they received. Well, who'd have thought it? It was a surprisingly good match. Everyone was satisfied. Evening slowly, the sky began to lower. Now, everything was covered in a bright orange light, so warm that you could warm yourself just by looking at it. She said in a happy voice that it looked like both skills had been acquired without any problems. The boy replied that he was glad that they all enjoyed it. Finally, at least now it was going smoothly. Se-young, she was excited, and she's already running around like a stung person. Well, that's very like her. Now it's worth it to try how they actually work. It seems like the result will be obvious. Charles smiled and said that she would try it now. The girl put her hands out in front of her and began to conjure. Several electric lightning bolts flew out of her hands and flew forward. The girl was incredibly pleased. The lightning bolts began to stretch out, taking on some sort of oblong shape. There was a crackling sound, as if someone had unluckily plugged something into an outlet. What the guy saw sent shivers down his spine and a look of surprise across his face. The shape of a spear? Really? How is that even possible? She created him. Indeed, the girl was holding a spear made of lightning. It was small, just the right size for the girl. Incredibly tense and focused, the girl looked at the weapon she had created. The boy pondered, yes, this particular spear is different from the spear of the Charl that was in the game, however. She is still at the beginning level of her E-skills, and has already made this particular type of weapon without hesitation. He says either the spear that other users made her, or her unrevealed skill that was mentioned in the previous chapters. Charlie held it like anything, and seemed a little shocked at what she'd managed to do herself. She certainly had the potential to be a spear wielder. The girl opened her eyes in surprise, and seemed even a little afraid of her power. She swung her spear, cutting through the air. The girl tried to wield it, and she was pretty good at it, for someone who had just picked up a weapon for the first time in her life. She swung her spear once more, and the weapon was followed by a flurry of electric sparks that turned into firelight. She was even a little menacing in this form. It seemed that the girl was no longer that cute little orb, but a real warrior. As soon as the girl swung her spear, there was a crackling sound, and the asphalt that was in front of her turned into a molten pile of scrap metal. Whoa! The girl herself was shocked at what she had managed to do. Lightning raged beside her. She even froze for a second to realize what she had accomplished. The place where she had just swung her spear was a trace, an excavator, electric current crackling everywhere. The girl herself was shocked and even a little scared. She froze in place. Yeah, if you operate this thing carelessly, it can be very dangerous. So it would be worth it for the girls to practice a bit with it. What they saw even made them feel a little creepy, because the spear mark was quite a threatening sign. The girl seemed to be absolutely delighted. She was smiling with her eyes wide open. A swift and powerful weapon. That's just great. She had gained possession of an incredibly powerful artifact. The guy looked at his characterization plate, which started beeping again, and a notification appeared on it, indicating that the girl had begun to trust him more. In addition, she was beginning to rely on him more. Her affection still hadn't increased. It hurt his pride, but that was okay. Suddenly something flew past him and stopped on the nearest fence. It was Si-yeon. The girl was already moving completely silently. She literally flies in the darkness. Now I can't hear her gate at all. Wind magic suits her very well after all. The girl stopped and stared off into the distance. She was literally engulfed in darkness. It looked mesmerizing and even scary. It also, in addition, increased the effect of the dagger with a suitable attribute for her. The girl clutched her blade, which had also undergone a slight transformation. The blade fit perfectly in her hand, and the girl felt as confident as possible with it. Now, she had increased her speed, and it was almost impossible to know where she was. She seemed to be incredibly pleased with this acquisition. Well, maybe so. The girl turned to look at her friend and smiled. Immediately, a sign popped up in front of the guy that her affection for him had increased. The level of affection is above. The girl's trust and intimacy would not change until Guy betrayed her. He was even a little dumbfounded by this. The poor man stood in front of the plaque and couldn't understand what was the matter. How could such a thing be achieved? He was even a little embarrassed by it. It was a little creepy for him to realize that the girl was so attached to him. And what was that about? He sighed heavily, and a small shiver ran through his whole body. Yeah, let him do what he wants now. He didn't give a damn anymore. And why should he care? He had some strange feelings in his heart after all. Why was the girl so attached to him? Soon night came. It covered the city with its dark blanket, and the windows in the various houses began to light up. But life went on. In a large building that literally went upwards, propping up the sky, crowded a lot of people. It was the Daehan auction, the world's largest auction house with a worldwide distribution network. After filling out the bid and a set of attributes put in as a lot here. For a good item put up here, and it is not a sin to bargain exactly, the guy naturally came to this auction to grab something. He wanted to take the most tidbits for himself. But he realized that the most important people would be here. He was well tired from the tight schedule. Yes, indeed, with a schedule like that, not many people can keep up. But it's better than going to the training ground now. And besides, there was a better chance of running into a Hun, and he didn't want to do that now. He sat down on the nearest couch and waited. He literally remembered the frenzied eyes the guy had used to look at Han Song. Even now he felt a little creepy. If he caught him, that kid wouldn't be able to get away from him. Goosebumps went down his spine at the mere thought of it. There was no desire to show his face to this man at all, to start pestering him with his battles again. At least he wasn't yelling, but it was best to avoid him further. Suddenly, a concierge, or just a casino attendant, appeared from the nearest door and asked the guy if he had reserved a seat. His voice even made the kid flinch a little. The guy immediately jumped up from his seat and held out his hand. Nice to meet you. The man handed him the auction ticket that indicated that he was a bidder. The man introduced himself and said that his name was Ding-Hu Lee, and he was the leader of the evaluation team. The guy looked at his ticket and squinted. They sell a lot of expensive goods here. Perhaps that was the reason why there were so many pleasant and highly skilled employees. No wonder the top expert in this area can match most of the corporate employees of the guild's leadership. Jin spoke to him incredibly politely and asked what did the guy bring here. Before putting an item on the auction, it must be checked. A skill like browsing information is not a good idea here. The boy placed his small sack bag in front of him and opened it. There lay the cubes and the various magic items he had carefully packed before. 7 sets with the darkness attribute, 3 sets with the lightning attribute, 1 hidden fragment from a small dungeon, 5 dungeon-forming items. The man even whistled at the good fortune. He pulled on his gloves so that God forbid he didn't get the valuable goods dirty. He asked if he could take a look. He apologized almost immediately. However, it was obvious that the man was impressed. Soon they approached the laboratory where the value of the goods being auctioned was investigated. It was quite an important facility, one of the most important. The man was wearing a monocle or something. It was a proximity device. He scrutinized the cube, which was a deep purple color. The man was even twitching with impatience. In a voice trembling with impatience, the man asked, and where was he to be found? He took off his glasses and still couldn't be happy with what he saw. Han calmly replied that he had made it himself. The man was even a little disbelieving at first. Yes, it was hard to believe that an ordinary kid could make an object of such purity. He walked me through it and said everything looked normal on the outside and there were no failures on the tests. The cubes continued to lie quietly on the table. The man was literally freaking out at what he was seeing. His expression changed slightly. He was looking at this little cube with a kind of manic love. He had amazing stability. He couldn't even believe he was seeing it with his own eyes. He asked if he could analyze his magic circle from the schematic. Han Song held up his finger and said there was no need for that. He has already sold his patent, and the man will be able to study it himself soon, and he'll post videos on his YouTube with similar comments. It seemed clear that the guy was trying to get publicity again. Naturally, who doubted, it's quite his style. He pointed his fingers at the man and told him to remember to subscribe and like, and have him turn on the notification. The guy looked like some kind of YouTuber for a children's show. Jin looked at him with uncomprehending eyes. Obviously, this was all new to the man. He was completely engrossed in this cube, and no one seemed to care that he was looking at it like a maniac. Anyway, it's amazing. He kept staring at the cube. In years, this one would be invented and it would become standard. There were no preconditions for this thing to occur now. It was normal to be surprised by such a thing. He was ahead of his time with this item. Han smiled. It looked like this set would be the main item of today's auction. He thought so too. The guy had full confidence in his abilities. He had done a good job, so now all he had to do was wait. Not a bad catch today. He moved to the waiting room and waited for the auction. The guy was literally shaking with impatience. He was anticipating that soon. Very soon he would have a lot of money. People began to whisper. A wide variety of people began to gather in the auction room. Is there going to be something special tonight? Someone got an urgent call from the band leader, and that's the main course for tonight. A very important item for the Scientific Research Institute of Inorganic Engineering. Someone's been talking. Someone was fiddling with their tablet, looking for something. No one was delivering above-average treasure class items today. It was delivered urgently. The set is of great value. Several men in neat suits were talking to each other. Apparently they were the highest ranks of this society. It's okay. He's got the teams ready, right? The man nodded his head. Each of the 5 teams would fulfill a different role. It costs a lot of money to use them as a fake bidder to do just that. If the situation calls for it, then sacrifices must be made. The cost of the victory is still paying off, so it's worth a shot. There is nothing to worry about. All costs will be paid. The girl's name was Jill. She looked to be somewhere between and years old. She was a CEO, so she was able to do that. And on the second child, the owner of the most successful company in Korea. She looked at her subordinates with a serious look and said that they should get it whatever it became. The woman said it in all seriousness. Suddenly a ringing sound came to her. It was as if someone had struck a small bell. The girl shuddered and was distracted from her monologue. Another man came up to her and said that the VIP room was occupied. Maybe he should check it out again. The girl waved her hand and said that she had come here in a hurry, so he shouldn't vacate the conference room because of that. Again, the girl shivered again. Someone was persistent. He even coughed. However, the girl realized that the meeting was a priority. She tried her best to ignore it all, but it was hard to eat. Our hero was sitting a few rows away from her on the next couch and seemed to be sleeping. Well, as always, he was too tired, and now, even here, he didn't miss the time to get some rest. The agents who were standing next to Jill were getting nervous, annoyed too. The girl grimaced, so annoyed. Who was this guy anyway? Where is that sound coming from? Suddenly she heard a sound so disgusting that she shuddered. What on earth is that? Who's acting like that around here? The girl was beginning to get angry. How annoying. She came here to work, and this is what's going on. She tried to concentrate and ignore these extraneous noises, but it was too difficult, so now she felt as uncomfortable as possible. Okay, just be patient. Just a little patience and everything will be fine. But the snoring continued. Somebody had unceremoniously decided to take a nap here. And that's all it was, but why snore like that? If their side goes into the final bidding round, then there's enough budget for everyone. Why does it have to happen at such a bad time? She heard all these annoying noises and tried to distract herself. But that shameless guy was not going to stop. He continued to snore so brazenly that his hair stood on end. The girl clenched her teeth. Today was not a good day, to put it mildly. What was the matter? Han suddenly woke up to his quadrocopter announcing the start of the auction. The guy woke up quickly and rubbed his eyes. The main auction was starting in 10 minutes. The drone mechanically announced to the boy that it was time to hurry. Jill was nearby and tried to pull herself together. In the end, she couldn't complete the meeting because the brat kept snoring nearby. Han didn't seem to mind what annoyed the visitors at all. He stood up and yawned loudly. So loudly that it echoed throughout the hallway. The woman and her agent walked a little behind him. Too much fatigue had accumulated during the day, so the guy dozed off again and started snoring. The woman passed by him and tried not to pay attention to this impudent man. She looked at him as if he were putting salt in her tea. The woman was extremely irritated by this insolence, but her upbringing did not allow her to come up and tell him to his face. The only thing to do was to stare nervously in his direction and hope that he would have the conscience to stop. But no, they just left the conference hall, and our comrade remained sitting on his chair and looking perplexed after the departing people. He sincerely did not understand why they were looking at him like that. Of course, you're snoring all over the room, and you're asking something else? Soon the auction began. The place was packed with people, and now it was jam-packed. Everyone was sitting in their seats and furiously writing something in their notebooks, trying to calculate their budget to snatch the most tidbits. In a word, a regular auction. Suddenly a booming voice sounded and a man walked onto the stage. At the very center stood the host, who was also the auctioneer. The main auction starts right now. His voice was so loud and boisterous that everyone else even flinched a bit. Even in the very back rows, everything was perfectly audible. It was time to roll out the first item. A man pulled a large box onto the stage and said it was the main course of the day. The box was covered with a neat blue cloth, and it alone was already worth a lot of money. The man took hold of the fabric and pulled it lightly. The fabric was very pleasant and soft to the touch. The cape fell like a small spring leaf. There were 3 cubes of paraphernalia. They stood like gems, and literally glowed with their dark violet light. They immediately mesmerized absolutely everyone. No one expected to see such an expensive item at this auction. People even held their breath in anticipation. Points people began to discuss. No one expected to see such an expensive item. They realized that they would have to pay a lot of money for such a treasure. But everyone sitting there would like to have it in their possession. The treasure was standing on her little pillow. High-end products, high-tech, incorporating the latest developments that are ahead of their time. A similar description to all the bidders. Of course, everyone was immediately interested and prepared all their money. 10 sets provided, it was decided to start the auction with 3 sets. The man pointed to the item with his hand and continued bidding. The remaining 7 will be sold at the end of the auction. Best strategy. Han sat in his seat and seemed a little bored. He was sad to be here. The starting bid was million. We had to start bidding. The guy started turning his head in different directions, trying to find something interesting. He was starting to get extremely bored here. Million. The prices were exorbitant. The guy looked at them, and it seemed to make him feel a little sick. He realized that all these people wouldn't miss their opportunity to get a piece of the action. Okay, we'll have to follow them better. The bidding continued. Million! People were sitting and whispering. Jill raised her finger and offered million. They started whispering amongst themselves. Million! It was just some cosmic sums. You could live the rest of your life without knowing poverty. The woman started talking to her subordinates. CEO Gil Yu-hyun was sitting next to her and seemed to be extremely worried. After her eldest son, she is one of the most influential in the company. Million! It was unimaginable. However, the guy was sitting there, bored somewhere off to the side. He wasn't really interested in watching the whole thing. He was more interested in finding out who the girl was. And he immediately realized that it was Gil Seon-hyung's sister. That's interesting. I wish I could get closer to her. Unlike that punk, she can be useful outside of battle. Still, sometimes it's good to have a couple of powerful people at your disposal. The boy looked at her discreetly. He would get a lot of benefits for cooperating with her. It would be a good option. Million! The bidding continued. No one wanted to give in. The girl sat there and didn't say anything. She analyzed the situation. There were too many big players here, so it would take a lot of effort to snatch such a tidbit. She sighed heavily and said that in that case they would put up billion, so we would have to wait. And they only had million. A look of fear and disappointment ran across the girl's face. Han was sitting somewhere nearby, analyzing the situation. To know the information he needed, they couldn't know he was eavesdropping, could they? He'd have to hide, or at least try not to reveal his presence. There's nothing this guy could do to hide, so. One of the agents approached the girl and said that given the enthusiasm at the start, at this rate, the prices would go up to 1 billion won. It was just some kind of cosmic amount. The guy had a sign in front of him. He was eavesdropping on them after all. Thankfully, no one's seen what he's doing yet. There were several soundtracks being analyzed by artificial intelligence. The maximum was 2 billion. He's getting everything live from a hidden drone. It's still convenient to have artificial intelligence at your disposal. You can eavesdrop like this. He thought that this way he could carve out a favorable position. Besides, he would have money. A lot of money. It would be wonderful. What a relief. The boy sighed. He would have to try hard, and then he could ensure a trouble-free life until his old age. With that kind of money, he would have no problem buying any item. After selling his jewelry, he would have countless amounts of money. Million. The prices kept going up and up. Sold! The final price was million. The man announced the sale. He waved his hand and ordered the treasure to be carried to the buyer. The guy was watching from the top position at the time. He saw everything and heard everything perfectly well. But there was nothing interesting after that. There was some minor trading going on. He was just watching. Everything that needed to be done was done. Now all you have to do is get your money and wait for something interesting to happen. What a bore. After this treasure, it was hard to impress anyone with anything. There was nothing interesting here. People were just haggling. The prices were too low. However, just making money was a success. Not bad at all. The attribute sets were sold for billion, 1 in billion and 1 in 6 billion respectively. Including the available million comes out to 5 in billion. That's an incredible amount of money. The guy was incredibly pleased. The seller announced the next item. The boy was wary. He might get something interesting, but he had to know what it was first. He moved a little closer and listened. Even a grade A appraiser couldn't appreciate the item. I had to call in a higher level appraiser. It was unbelievable, a one-of-a-kind item. That means it's worth an order of magnitude of money. He pulled off his handkerchief and there was an egg in front of the others. Yes, a very ordinary egg, except it's really big. That was interesting. If you looked closely, you could see that this egg had several scales on it, so it was some kind of unusual egg. Interesting already. Couldn't even appreciate such a high-level specialist. That means this thing is going to be quite valuable. The guy took a closer look and wondered. Even an appraisal by a rank A expert is worth tens of millions, and an appraisal by a rank C expert is worth hundreds of millions. If the goods do not cover the grade, it will only bring losses, so the grade is not carried out, and the goods are just put up like that. The guy wondered, if this thing came up in an auction and he managed to buy it, he would get either a very dangerous or a very rare item. Could look with the information gathering. The guy opened the sign. He wanted to know what the hell it was. A sign popped up in front of him saying that he was using information browsing. He sat back down and began to study the object. There were a lot of numbers and letters. The guy read carefully. He read harder and harder. Each time he read, something in his soul began to tingle. As soon as he saw what he saw, he choked up a little. His eyes began to widen rapidly. He himself had not expected to see something like this here. The guy was just in complete shock. You just couldn't be. Now that he fully realized what he had seen, not just a legion, but an armada of goosebumps ran down his back. The boy released his eyes and tried to come to his senses, but it was impossible. A display with information about an unknown large egg. The egg of a young SS ranked Draconian. The egg was sealed during the Dragon War a very long time ago. The egg is from a white dragon and a Draconian. The poor guy started gulping for air. His whole body started shaking. This is crazy. The guy was so scared he could barely control himself. Turns out he's gonna jump up on the chair. Now the guy was determined. He just had to buy it. No, he was obsessed. He couldn't pass up such a tidbit. Give it to him. He literally went insane. It just couldn't be true. He kept trembling. His body was overwhelmed with the desire to buy this thing. He tried to pull himself together, but it was not working very well. He had seen such a valuable thing that now it had taken over his whole attention. Okay, time to come to his senses. The boy calmed down a bit and began to watch the auction again. A dragon egg, and it must be very difficult to obtain. Tame it even more so, but a hybrid is another matter. It's easier to deal with than dragons. It's usually a mix of human and dragon, so it shouldn't be a problem. He started looking at the egg again, so he owed it to him to buy it. He had no right to miss a chance like this. The man in the elegant suit continued the bidding. The starting bid is $1,000,000. The bidding starts now. His voice was still loud but unemotional at the same time. The guy immediately opened his spreadsheet and started frantically calculating the odds. He had to start with million, 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 million. Prices were rising at an astonishing rate. The guy was shocked. Wow, in! This really is the centerpiece of the auction. $1,000,000! But it's still unappraised, which means it's going to be a real hunt for it. We've got to get the money ready. $1,000,000! The man kept shouting out the price. In such a case, you have to act decisively. The guy realized he couldn't pass up the chance. $1,000,000! The guy literally shouted it out. $1,000,000 took an appraised item. Share it! Think I doubled just by mistake! He was so excited he was ready to jump on that auctioneer right now. $1,000,000! You guys should save his money for his set. $1,000,000! Just let them give in. He was literally trembling. His impatience was over the top. More bets. No more bets. The guy was literally trembling with fear. No, the betting had stopped. J-Mel sat behind him and looked at the guy with a surprised look. We did it! The lot was sold for $1,000,000. The guy's joy was unbounded. The announcer announced the sale. Han began to smile, so wide that he thought he was going to tear his mouth open. Finally, he'd done it. Beautiful. Luck had worked once again after all. How many times had it bailed him out in situations like this before? He clenched his fists with such force that his bones crunched. Excellent! Excellent! His heart was literally bursting out of his chest, so intense was the bidding, although it seemed that no one really wanted to buy this unappreciated item, so he still had a lot of chances. However, right now he wasn't thinking about it at all. He sank heavily into his chair and exhaled. He had barely bought it. His whole inner him was overflowing with joy. The guy was breathing heavily. This is what real auctions are all about. This is the excitement and adrenaline that you cannot confuse with anything. Luckily, he had enough money. He was so nervous he'd need Valadol right now. He hadn't gotten his enrollment money yet. Just think, CC class. This is unbelievable. The price is too low for this item. If all the information about him had been revealed earlier, there's no way he could have bought it. Then the prices would have skyrocketed just instantly. They would have gone over tens to hundreds of billions. He inwardly rejoiced. No, he exulted. Yes, it's hard to gauge his worth here. This egg hatches when enough magic and blood are obtained. It is easy to tame a creature that mistakes the first creature it sees for its parent. So there should be no problem with this in principle. All that's left to figure out is how good he is at parenting. There would have been more information about this item. He wouldn't have been able to grab it at such a favorable price. Inside himself, the guy still didn't bother to rejoice. This is a real lucky day. Although with his ability, every day was a lucky day for him. He was breathing heavily, but he was already starting to calm down. He stood up from his seat. He was going to address Gilyu Hyun at the end of the auction. But this person couldn't be approached so easily. He was an important person after all. But he changed his mind. He had to finish quickly and go home. Everything that needed to be done was done, and everything else could wait. On his way out of the auction room, the guy turned his attention to Jill, who was sitting a few rows away from him. He coughed heavily to get her attention. He hoped the girl would at least look at him. He wanted to get closer, but a guard stood in his way like a wall. The man was menacingly tall and strong. One punch would probably be enough to knock the guy out for good. A man came closer and put his hand out in front of his face. In a loud and menacing voice, he said, "No one can come in here! Step back now!" I don't think he was kidding. Better not to piss off a man like that. He looked at the boy as if he wanted to tear him apart, but perhaps he did, for this man was called upon to protect his superior, even at the cost of his life. So there was no doubt that he would kill anyone in his way if necessary. Han looked at him with a frightened look, and the boys got a chill inside. He would have to be extremely careful and cautious, unless he wanted to end up in jail or someplace much worse than jail. He said in a polite voice that he just wanted to ask something. The boy tried to look as friendly as possible, so as not to arouse suspicion. After all, the man was a professional killer, apparently. That's how. He looked at him with surprise and seemed to soften. The man wanted to ask if she meant his meeting a begging sign, however. The guy flushed past and didn't even say a word. He approached the girl and she noticed him at once. She got to her feet and asked him what business he had with her. "She's an A-rank hero. She doesn't really need guards except for her reputation." The girl looked at him with a serious, concentrated gaze. Naturally, some stranger approached her out of the blue. The look on her face did not bode well, and he had to talk to her as carefully as possible to avoid getting into trouble. If the guy says something weird or naughty, it's possible that she'll just hit him, and who knows what will follow. And he still has a low level of attractiveness, so the odds of her falling in love with his face and acting elegant are slim to none. However, he still had idiotic images in his head of a woman who, as soon as she saw him, immediately fell in love. That was funny. What are you thinking, man? I thought you had some business to attend to, and you're doing nothing. But immediately the guy came to reality. This was simply impossible. He frowned and tried to put his thoughts in order. What the hell was he thinking? You come to an auction talking to a girl who is one of the most powerful people in the country. Are you an idiot? He stood and stomped around trying to regain his senses. He wanted to get his treasure and get out of here as soon as possible. But there was one more thing to do. You just have to smile, or at least pretend to smile, and then everything should go as it should. He said in a plaintive voice that it was about a set of attributes. The girl looked at him with surprise. "What's the matter?" And immediately, he said without a shadow of a doubt that he had made it with his own hands. The girl was even a bit taken aback by such a statement, her face showing that she didn't quite trust this kid. And in principle, it makes sense. It's the first time she's seen him. The girl thought for a moment and asked, "Is this really true? What kind of nonsense is this? How could such a thing even be believed? Did this guy really think that as soon as he made such a statement, everyone would believe him?" Hans smiled, however, and showed his contact information. Well, she could believe whatever she wanted. It was her right. But if she had any questions, let her call the number. The girl was wary, of course. It was very easy to check, so she's going to do it. And if this guy is lying, then he's going to be in very big trouble. But if he's not lying, then how should she feel about it? The girl was even a little afraid. What she should do. Okay, better to be fooled 100 times than to miss an opportunity like this once. The girl took his card. It's not a time to be proud. It's a time to grab luck by the tail. Some more time she stood looking at him without changing expression. He just smiled and tried to be as friendly as possible. She pushed her guard away with her hand, showing him that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. The man stopped, stunned. He didn't trust this guy, who had so brazenly walked past him without a word. However, the woman gestured that everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. She would talk to him anyway. The guy took a few steps closer to her and tried to be as polite as possible. He realized that with people like this, you have to be very careful, otherwise there would be very big problems. His tension had reached a breaking point. He tried to make the most of the situation and use all his charm to his advantage. He smiled the most benevolent smile possible so as not to seem like a maniac trying to infiltrate the girl. His smile indicated that the guy was definitely up to something. Okay, looks like everything's going according to plan. He handed the girl his business card with a sharp motion. It was a small piece of paper with his initials and his personal contact information written on it. Then the guy approached her and whispered that the deal had to be done in person, so there was no need to hurry. His eyes were still squinted, and he had the same smile on his lips. After saying this short phrase, the guy turned around and walked towards the exit. Everything that needed to be done was done. Now it was time to go and collect his winnings. He took a quick step towards the exit of the auction hall where the bidding continued. The girl was left standing in utter bewilderment. On the one hand, this guy seemed very strange to her, coming in just like that and claiming to be the inventor of this item she had just bought for a fabulous sum of money. On the other hand, who knows? Maybe what he says is true. The guy at this time quickly left the hall. and with a light slam of the door behind him left the room. The girl didn't even know what to say. She stood there wondering. What could it mean? How to understand his forgiving sign? She was a little creepy, and a little uncomfortable with the fact that this guy was so cheeky points. Although maybe it was an indication that he was telling the truth. The girl frowned. She was beginning to notice strange things. She hadn't noticed it to begin with, but now it was starting to become clearer. Goosebumps ran down her spine at what she realized. He's so ugly after all. The girl almost threw up. She could hardly stop gagging when she interacted with this man. Yeah, I guess his charm is still low. Why don't you raise it? Soon the boy returned to his dormitory, where the windows were already starting to light up. The day was coming to an end. Now he had to get on with his winnings. He held the egg tightly in his hands, as if it were the most valuable thing he had at the moment. But it was in fact the most valuable thing he had. The boy laughed, his hands shaking with impatience, afraid of dropping the egg. The boy looked at him the way Golem usually looks at a sun ring. Just what she needed to say, my pretty. The boy squeezed the egg and held it as gently as was even possible. A quadrocopter buzzed beside him, continuously recording everything that was happening to put on YouTube. It was going to get a lot of views. It was going to be perfect. Everything must go according to plan. After all, he had done everything right. The only thing left to do was to make this egg hatch faster. He put some tubes to his body and made something like a drip to feed the egg with his blood. The red liquid moved through the tubes. He pointed the other end of the tube directly at the egg. One more second, and everything would happen. He was literally trembling with impatience. And so, red blood gushed from her eggshell. He stood there like some madman. The boy fell to the floor and waited for his star. His eyes lit up. He looked pretty creepy from this side. A few drops of blood fell onto the eggshell and began to spread. They immediately began to soak inside. Something strange was happening. However, it's all in the order of things. Then the egg completely absorbed the blood into itself and began to vibrate. Something was definitely going to happen now. The boy held his breath. The quadrocopter kept circling nearby and informed the boy that if he used any more blood and magic, his potion wouldn't cover the cost. This was bad. He needed to regain his strength somehow. This is dangerous, and he must stop. The quadrocopter seemed genuinely concerned for his master's health. The boy looked at him with a surprised look and nodded his head. Ah, yes there, we must stop. One more time wouldn't hurt, though. He let the egg absorb its life force again, and then the incomprehensible metamorphosis began to happen. The quadrocopter just flew around silently. The egg has begun to absorb the magic. Come on, hatch faster! The guy held the egg in his hands as gently as if it were his own child. He looked like a chicken. That feels so good. Even though his strength was slowly leaving him, the guy wasn't even going to stop. His body began to weaken with each passing second. The artificial intelligence quadcopter was already starting to get genuinely worried. It was asking him to stop. Even the artificial intelligence seemed to realize the danger of what he was doing. The guy looked at the device directly into the camera. His face was pale as death, and his eyes had changed. The guy was on the verge of death, and his strength was starting to wane. The device came almost right up to his face, and seemed to insist that the guy stop. It's dangerous to his life! Okay, fine, he'll stop. Finally he stopped, and the device calmed down. Now he sat and held the egg that still hadn't been beaten. Well, we'll have to wait a little longer. He stopped torturing himself and lay back on the bed. The boy was breathing hard. It was still quite a task to hatch this egg. Too bad he didn't know how much blood and magic it would take to hatch. Okay, I'll have to look something up on the internet. When he thinks of dragons, one video comes to mind that he saw relatively recently. The guy opened the panel and started searching for the video on a video hosting site. Soon he found what he was looking for and pressed play. The video began to play. The Black Valley appeared at once, and there was a dragon flying up there, somewhere in the dark clouds. Only its silhouette was still visible. However, it was already clear that this thing was quite threatening. It had a horrible face, smoke billowing from its nostrils, eyes burning red fire. The dragon showed that it was ready to destroy all living things in its path. The monster was quite dangerous. What was there? It was deadly to anyone. Soon, the dragon itself was fully revealed. It was covered in dark magic, its entire body covered in tough scales that protected it from magical and physical attacks. The monster roared at the top of its voice. Its roar echoed throughout the valley. An evil dragon who had achieved divinity through harm. Hegemord. Suddenly, an explosion was heard somewhere in the distance, as if something large and heavy had fallen to the ground. The dragon realized and turned his gaze here. The man tightened his hands into fists. He began to approach the monster point. His body seemed to glow from this divine energy that overflowed his body. His goal was to destroy this thing. It was Hong. He was dressed in his trademark clothes, a large cape, and a hero costume. Behind his back, the sun was glowing. The man himself was the sun. He looked at the dragon with a sizzling gaze, making it clear that he had no intention of backing down. The man rushed straight at the monster without delay, his face reflecting the determination and courage that overwhelmed his body and soul. He ran straight at the dragon. He had no fear or regret. The dragon looked at him with its red, sizzling eyes and roared. He was disgusted that someone had dared to interfere with him. They immediately clashed in a fight, Hong hitting it with his weapon so hard that the dragon's head nearly fell off. The beast roared, its wrenching roar filling the valley. Blood spurted from its head. His mouth was filled with sharp teeth, but it didn't seem to bother the hero. The monster roared, but it was useless. Their fight was heating up and the monster was flying in the sky. All the clouds that were nearby at that moment parted from such a violent explosion. Now it's just a matter of time. He will easily defeat this dragon. The monster opened its toothy maw and began to spew flames. Or rather, it was dark matter, destroying everything in its path. Now it will have enough mana to destroy the pesky hero. It was so easy to give up. He sprang at it in one great leap and gave it a crushing blow with his foot. The dragon slammed its jaws shut, and I think a few of its teeth flew out. The boy was so strong that even such a dragon was not much of a threat to him. He swung again, this time with his fist. His hand glowed with overflowing energy, and now he was ready to fight this dragon. One more blow, and the beast would be defeated. The guy hit him right in the head, and it blew off like a watermelon. Yeah, he was a hero back there. Now, for him, even fighting a dragon was a regular thing. A true hero, a defender of mankind. The boy sat there and watched the whole superb spectacle. There were bangs and explosions and screams. For a second he even got goosebumps. Well, what's to be surprised about? Yes, it was the most shocking footage available until the end of the game. The boy was lying on his couch, stroking the egg next to him. After that, only a crazy person wouldn't be wary of Hong after seeing him slay a dragon with his bare hands. That guy's strength is amazing. It was worth watching out for, but that's not what you have to fear now. The boy pressed the egg to his chest, which became warm. It would be very irresponsible of him to show such a thing to his future child. The boy mentally apologized to the egg and held it even tighter. It wasn't supposed to see that. I think he was slowly starting to lose his mind. He leaned the egg against him and like a chicken trying to keep it safe from everything. The evil dragon this guy was definitely not going to get. However, he wasn't going to leave it alone. So for now, one must not show his finder to everyone so irresponsibly. The guy realized that he should train the little dragon well, so that he wouldn't grow up to be such a vicious monster. The next day, he went to the university as always. Studying couldn't wait, but he really wanted to spend some more time with his treasure. He found a better option, to take the egg with him to his studies. He even bought a small bag for this purpose, in which he put all his items, and now there was a big egg in there. As soon as he stepped down into the university, there were immediate whispers. Everyone looked at him with astonishment, and even some caution. This guy is cultivating something. Since he's channeling, he's definitely looking for people's attention. Whispers were heard everywhere. No, something's wrong. I think he's gotten a little more attractive. I think people are starting to see things in him that they've been trying to ignore until now. Is his popularity growing? If that's a little more attractive, then I'm just a celebrity? People started to bump into each other. Yes, he's getting better ratings. That's naturally a good thing. But it's not enough. He wanted more popularity more. I think he even became a little obsessed. Charm points are increasing thanks to the charm surge, but it already takes a whole month to reach at least 10. That's too slow. The boy pressed the dragon even harder against him. Okay, there's still something that can be done about it. We must get the potion by all means and increase the charm level. He made a grimace that would scare anyone. Oh my god, look at his face. These humiliations, he'll remember them all, and then he'll take his revenge. And his revenge will be insidious. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice saying hello to everyone present. The boy looked in that direction in surprise. A man in a neat suit stood there, looking at all the other students. It had been too long. The man was smiling, looking extremely friendly. His name was Han Do-seok, the same man who had met the students at the beginning of their journey. Yes, he was a high-ranking hero who had guided them in the beginning on the introductory missions. The man smiled and said that he was their disposal now. All around spreads heroes only A and B rank. From a hero with rank is a completely different feeling. He literally reeks of power and strength. They are not only letters different, there is a huge gulf between them. Such a rank has at least a rare status, and has signed a contract for a status no less legendary. Since they are at the beginning of the path of divinity, that's the level. That's something worth striving for. I'll have to get to those heights soon. The guy realized it was too far for him. They must be prepared for a future crisis, so there's no time to waste. They must act decisively. A man stood in front of them and spoke in a loud voice. He said that within 2 weeks, they should attend basic lectures about weapons, regardless of the type of weapons chosen in the entrance exam. They must be well-versed in all types, for they are the future of this country. However, also there would be special lectures where they would get all the knowledge they needed. The man said it as if it was something ordinary for him. He drew a magic circle, and immediately the weapons appeared there. He ordered all the other students to come out on a first-come, first served basis, and let them take what they liked best. There were a variety of weapons. There seemed to be something for everyone. Smiling, the man told them to get out wisely, for they would have to train with this weapon for the next weeks. Soon they came to the training room, which is where the main training would take place. Students slowly began to approach. Next student! Most of all, students choose the sword, as it is the easiest weapon to wield, or at least it seems so. After the popularity of the sword comes spears, bows, and a couple exotic weapons. These are chosen less often. The boy looked at the weapons rack, which had a variety of everything on it. Those who concentrate on studying magic most often choose wands or staffs. They are useful for maintaining mana and intelligence. The boy looked at the others. Of course, his good acquaintances were there as well. Hong, to everyone's surprise, didn't choose anything. It seems that this guy will prefer to fight with his bare hands until the end. Well, no wonder. Although things are going according to plan here. This guy punches his way in with his fist, and he's not going to choose any weapon. It's humiliating for him. These guys are even more attention-hungry than the main character. Not one normal person. Yeah? In this world, danger awaits at every turn. You need to be ready for anything, and weapons are the main option to defend yourself. It's no surprise that the main characters already have the abilities they need to survive here. So be it. The guy sighed heavily. He just couldn't believe he was stuck in this place. This was just humiliating. He had gone through this game dozens of times, and now he was stuck here? This was so much worse in reality. The girl was the next to choose, came someone's timid voice. She was barely trying not to stammer, but she seemed to be having a hard time doing it. The girl took hold of the magic bow and held on tightly with her hand. She looked rather shy. The girl was somewhere around his age. She had wide glasses over her eyes. She had chosen a bow, and her hair was braided into a small ponytail. On High Rim. That was her name. The girl was discouraged by something. She looked shyly in front of her. She was even a little scared of being here. The guy was busy with other characters the whole time, and didn't even pay attention to her. The girl took her bow and quiver of arrows and went the other way. But getting her as an ally would be nice too. He used the browsing information. Bow. It's a great tool to backstab and stalk due to its attack radius. The girl's characteristics weren't bad. Strength points, speed, dexterity, endurance sense. Magic power, mental power, intelligence, charm, potency. Unique skills centered 6 senses unrevealed skill. Special clairvoyance skill unrevealed and another skill that was not seen at all. Very good. The guy's honed mindset and element have already awakened, and the most important thing hasn't yet. But it's getting there. Her most important characteristic, and at the same time her strongest. Multiple personalities. Thanks to this skill, when her personality changes, her characteristics change. Personality A, she had the standard characteristics, and Personality B's characteristics increased somewhere, and decreased somewhere. If the current introverted personality is suited for long-range attacks, it's the other one for close combat. The boy looked in her direction. She isn't limited to just the two of them. As she grows and matures, she will be able to form more of her personalities. Those she specializes in, since from long range, are pretty bad. If the opponent lowers her with a point, her skill completely negates that disadvantage. She was an incredibly talented girl, but also incredibly shy. She was afraid of literally everything. That's why he should make her his ally. Soon, the next candidate was called. That was our main character. He approached at a brisk walk, still holding his egg in the basket. It's kind of tricky. You gotta follow the plan, right? There were only 2 weapons in front of his face. In front of him stood the sword and the little girl. Well, if he was going to follow the plan, he would be a sword mage. Hence the need to choose. He took his sword in one hand and his wand in the other. The tablets immediately appeared in front of him. The boy looked at his weapons and crossed them together. They glowed with a strange bluish glow. Okay, if he was going to stick to the plan, there was no need to get distracted. The instructor wondered, sword and sorcery? That would be quite difficult, the boy replied. He wasn't going to give up either of them. He has a double specialization after all. The instructor looked at him with pride and said it was exactly what he expected. He hoped the boy would become a hero who would light up their country in the future. He said this with some very strong pride. The boy was even a little surprised. He looked at him in surprise, but the instructor kept talking. He said that he liked his idea of combining sword and magic. The mood is rather strange, of course, but let the boy take into account that it takes talent. The instructor put his arm around his shoulder and led him along. The boy was even a little frightened by this pressure. It seemed to him that the instructor was about to do something. He tensed his whole body and tried to concentrate in order not to arouse suspicion in any way, as he realized that now absolutely everyone was looking at him. Maybe he had one. The instructor pushed the boy forward, and now he had to show what he could do. The boy moved forward in silence. The instructor put his arm around his shoulders, and it looked rather strange from the outside. It's rare to put them together. The man continued to speak in surprise. He had been named when he was admitted, but he should always be aware that with opportunities come limitations. The guy felt a little awkward in this situation. He could literally feel everyone's eyes on him. What a scary guy. What discrimination? Overreacting to all of this. He could feel all these feelings, and it terrified him. Okay, his popularity is dropping by the day. That sucks. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. If he had a higher charm level, maybe things would have turned out differently. It's hard to take that kind of hostility. But okay, that's him. He finally realized that he still needed to increase his charm level a little, even a little, or else at this rate his life wouldn't be easy. Plans. Soon the day came to an end, and the lad returned to his place. The windows had already begun to light up there, and night had descended upon the city. Okay, that should be the end of it for today. The guy threw off his clothes and decided to get some rest. It had been a pretty productive day. The quadricopter flew up to him and told him that the boy was exerting himself too much lately, but he waved it off and said it was okay, he was almost done after all. Besides, he's made careful preparations. Now everything would be much easier. He held out his hand and pointed forward, where there were many bottles of various potions. Now everything will go as it should. It took a lot of reputation points to make these potions, but it wasn't all wasted. He put his hands on his sides and looked at his creation with pleasure. He should be able to do it now. He picked up the egg and grasped it well. It's time to start. He'll call it using rare items to raise a SS-rank dragon. It's the perfect name. I should have recorded a preview. Then they would proceed with filming and final editing. Drone nodded his head if he had one. Now the most important thing. The guy was just over the moon. The views would skyrocket. He was incredibly happy about his ingenuity. Then he would definitely raise his popularity even higher. This was just unbelievable. The guy was happy. Truly, he was literally glowing with joy. It's been 2 hours since the guy started growing this egg with magic. Now he was feeling a little uneasy. All the potions had run out, and the egg kept absorbing magic. Now the guy felt really fucked up. The egg had absorbed enough, however, not very much. He was mana depleted. He had lost a large amount of blood. His stamina was restored with life force. His mana was restored with a life force potion. He had goosebumps on his back and felt dizzy. Here we go. Exhaustion is on its way. But that pain is nothing compared to what he's gonna get. The guy didn't seem like he was gonna back down at all. Dude, don't you think you're overdoing it? I think you're gonna feel really bad after this. How much sleep is he gonna get? He had used up all his potions and all his IVs, so now he had almost nothing left. The boy looked at his spreadsheet thoughtfully. Now, however, everything has worked out. The dragon slowly began to hatch. The shell began to crack, and a rumbling sound could be heard from there. Did it really work? Had all his hard work paid off? It may seem at first glance that incubating an egg is a simple task, but it is not. Dozens of liters of blood were spent on it, as well as a lot of magical energy. Even a high-ranked hero would use up all the energy to do this. The egg continued to move, and slowly cracked. And lo and behold, there came a foot. A dragon hatching. His paw was cart-nasty, and immediately the skin was quickly pierced. The guy almost went crazy with joy. Yes, this is it. He was incredibly happy. The dragon had almost hatched. He kept holding the egg in his hands and it kept cracking. Way to go! He had finally made it. The hatching of the egg should happen by itself without anyone's help. By the way, it started to emanate a strange mist that spread throughout the room. The air is beginning to fill with Mom, though the cub hasn't fully hatched yet, as expected of a dragon. And the egg was cracking with every second. And then, suddenly for everyone, and especially for our hero, the egg broke in half. Something flew out of there and immediately soared upwards. The guy didn't even realize it. He was scared. No, he almost crapped his pants. He looked up and looked at it. The first thing he saw was a long ear. Fur. Indeed, it was a dragon. Then he saw a small horn sticking out of its head. A dragon! The dragon had hatched. And now, before the boy stood the little cub. It was so small, about the size of a small puppy. As soon as it came into the white light, the dragon opened its mouth, which by the way already had sharp teeth, and screamed like a small child. The boy became confused. He looked at the dragon with some fear. An aura of fear started to fly around him. He began to look closer. Yes, it was the dragon's exactly. Did he really have it all worked out? Everything is going exactly according to plan. The guy was beyond happy. He immediately grabbed the dragon. Even the way this little guy was yawning was an incredibly cute sight. The guy was just ready to melt right now. He held the little dragon, which was incredibly heavy for its age, but his skin was soft to the touch. The little dragon that had just come into the world did not understand anything yet. He looked at the boy with his big yellow eyes with vertical pupils. A true predator. But now he was completely harmless. He was so cute that no kitten could compare to him. Yeah, he's his daddy! What? He's already become a daddy? A begging sign, the dragon started pulling his little paws towards him. He started squeaking. It was so cute the guy couldn't help himself. He immediately nuzzled the dragon, who was surprisingly warm. He didn't seem to like it very much, but the guy didn't care. He just kept squeezing it. It had been a long time since he'd seen such cuteness. A dragon that fit in the palm of his hand. It's hard to imagine that this little cutie could soon become a huge beast capable of wiping out an entire city. The scales are soft and fluffy to the touch, but they're strong enough to withstand any attack. Why is it so white and beautiful? Okay, it's time to name him. The guy lifted the dragon up as if from a Lion King cartoon. From now on, his name is White. The dragon immediately waved his paws happily, which had cute pads on them. His appearance was so cute that it was impossible to resist. Immediately, characterization plates began to appear. You are using the information viewer. Character name White. Muscle mass magic power. Speed mental strength. Agility stamina endurance and mental strength potential points. No unique skills. No special skills. Dragon heart specialty. Guardness's dragon scale power is unawakened. Dragon blood is unawakened. And another ability window. Wow! His birth characteristics are already so impressive. Draconians aren't even considered fully human. His dragon heart that possesses an infinite supply of magic can be considered simply the most powerful creature on Earth. It's simply unbelievable. Without unique specialties and skills, he can even recognize even the hidden unawakened characteristics. The dragon heart began to beat even more frequently. The boy continued to keep a close eye on his child. Now he was instantly attached to him. A smile appeared on his face. He was incredibly pleased with his success. He now had a real treasure.
Isn't that the most beautiful thing you can find in this game? The guy lifted the dragon up, and the dragon squeaked lightly, startled. He was still a baby, and the guy was already rubbing him like that.
Soon, they both fell asleep. This waking procedure took a lot of energy and effort. It was necessary to rest. The dragon was lying right on the boy's stomach. He was incredibly comfortable. The little dragon was lying on his chest like a child, snoozing peacefully. The boy snored, but it didn't seem to stop the little dragon from lying quietly on his master. They both fell asleep. The guy finally woke up after some time and yawned sweetly. He felt incredibly warm and pleasant. Guy had slept well, and now it seems that his strength had recovered almost completely. The guy felt great. He took the baby and gently removed it from his chest. It was so warm that the boy even dozed off. It was incredibly comfortable in here after all. All right, enough lying around. It was time to check on success. He opened the video hosting window and started reading the comments. There was a lot to look at. The comments varied. He can play any character, but it seems like a lot of people take his acting too seriously. And it's scary. There were a lot of comments discussing the guy's tumultuous life. They seemed to be interested in it a lot, even too much. Anyway, he got an invitation from the guild. It's a nice boost to his social skills, and his standing in the community. The public response is pretty good. Reputation points, that's not bad at all. He's growing up right in front of my eyes. He had collected a lot of reputation points, and now the opportunity to buy 4 mid-level random potion boxes had opened up to him, the guy thought. This was a pretty important purchase, so he had to think it over carefully. At that moment, he heard something begin to fidget beside him. The dragon finally woke up and looked at his foster father with big, yellow eyes. He was incredibly cute now. The boy looked at him with inexpressible tenderness, as if this were really his real child. He put his hand on his head and began to stroke it with such an effort as if he were cleaning his clothes. The dragon squirmed, which was nice, but we think the guy overdid it again. Will you stop petting him like that? He's so cute. Just like that, like an overload of cuteness and... The dragon began to grunt from overexertion, and indeed his master seems to have gotten too carried away. Okay, he'd gotten too caught up in the moment, and now he had important things to distract himself with. The boy turned away and thought, should have finished shopping after all. It had completely slipped his mind, and he would still need to buy 4 boxes of potions. A complicated purchase, and quite a responsibility. The guy bought, and the purchases immediately showed up on the screen. The quadrocopter flew closer to him and said in a satisfied manner that he thought the guy had made the right choice. It didn't matter what he got if there was a chance to get a potion to increase charm, especially on YouTube. Looks were very important, it seemed to him. That's right, YouTube attractiveness is the foundation of all the basics. The guy was enthusiastic. All that was left was to raise his popularity points, and then everything would be fine. He felt that success awaited him. He only needed to stretch out his hand and everything would be in his hands. The quadrocopter flew closer to him and said that he thought good genetics was a blessing for an attention seeker. The last words were said in a peculiar accent that made even the guy cringe. He's an attention seeker, isn't he? It sounds strange, but it seems to describe his characterization perfectly. Look at her choice of words. How did she learn to speak like that? Where did she get that level of sophistication? She seems more human than the humans themselves. The boy asked in surprise. How did she learn to talk like that? Her vocabulary has grown considerably. She's adapting quickly. With those words, the guy shivered a little. The drone nodded. That's acceptable. Well, that's nonsense. This can't be happening. Dragonlance watched it all from the sidelines and flapped his big eyes. He didn't understand human speech, but that's for now. The boy continued to be afraid. It's not like she can learn words like that. Dragons grasp everything on the fly. But so he would learn the language quickly, he should be careful with such statements. Although it's annoying. But now he has to open these boxes. He should have opened the middle-class box with the potions. We can only hope that something worthwhile falls out. He uses the 4 boxes of mid-range potions, and extraordinary luck is activated. What? What the hell? Then a few potion bottles showed up. The user's desire interacts with luck. Wow, now. Is it really something good? The guy was sitting on his bed, trying to figure out what had just happened. Several signs popped up in front of him. You have received a multi-ranked potion of spike-inducing charms. Next, he received a low-ranked grooming kit. He got a shadow mask on top of that. And on top of that, from Botox. He sat there and couldn't get excited. At last! Things to increase the charm. It couldn't be better. It's marvelous! The guy couldn't find himself from happiness. Night had already dominated the city. The tall buildings stacked against the sky, some with lights on, were relatively quiet. A girl stood on the roof of a building, watching the city at night. You could tell who she was from the back. Long hair the color of a shadow, and special clothing for assassins. Shi Young stood on the roof and studied the information table. Ball hadn't seen any suspicious activity, and so far everything was going smoothly, so let's hope that everything would go on like this. The girl listened. For some reason, she constantly felt like someone was watching her. It was starting to get annoying. She didn't want anyone to stop her from putting her plans into action. However, this man's brother cautiously acts behind the scenes. He won't be able to easily influence the affairs of the academy one way or another. However, one had to be careful. Still, she didn't like these guys. One had to act as a shadow so as not to arouse suspicion. Moreover, Han is most focused on training with the genin. After getting the new information, the girl was more concerned about a little bit different. She frowned. That's Julia! She's even more fussy than Chungyun. The girl frowned. Yi pictured that girl behind her back. She was starting to annoy her more and more. She's been thinking Han Sung's been doing nothing but talking ever since he formed the band, but he's definitely up to something, judging from the information screen. Just now, the girl wanted to find out so that you wouldn't. It's the unknown, and she was getting annoyed. She wanted to know more because the success of the operation depended on it. She thought for a moment. Julia Martin. That girl is rather tactless, and besides annoying by her mere presence. If she does not use her eyes, should she rid her of them? The girl reached for her own. However, this nasty wench owns a big company, which could create a problem. If she tries to eliminate Julia, someone just knows about it definitely, so we need to proceed a little more carefully. So Young realized she'll prevent Han Sung from being happy if she acts rashly. She should be more careful. It's better to observe and wait for the moment. In the meantime, she should focus on the task at hand. The girl crouched down and prepared to jump. Yes, this newcomer was the strangest person she had ever met in her life. He was definitely hiding something very interesting, and I wanted to find out what it was all about. Magic, great swordsmanship, and his ability to have so many trump cards up his sleeve. It's ridiculous. It just didn't make sense. She thought he had a talent for assassination. She doubted there was anything in the world the child of the Black Earth had not seen, but still, why would he refuse to work with her? Had he been doing this for too long, and he was getting tired of it? The girl understood all of that. She, too, was getting tired of the killer's activities, so she understood the guy perfectly. She pulled the mask over her face and stepped forward. The girl stood on the very edge of the building, which was quite tall. However, jumping from such a height would be no problem for her. A moment more and she would fly down. She held her breath and looked down. There were people staring at her, a lot of people who could potentially be her victims, and so, the girl took the last step and flew upside down. However, it was not scary for her. She was not afraid of crashing at all. She flew like a shadow. The girl was grouped together, and in such a state she would not be seen by many people. Her dark suit and hair blended in with the scenery, so the camouflage was perfect. The girl flew straight down, unable to see anything in front of her. It was like an easy walk for her. She did it all the time. Suddenly she turned into a small shadow, and unnoticed by the others, she yorked into a nearby crevice. She easily seeped in like a liquid, and now she was already inside the building. It was quite quiet and dark, so the girl with her current abilities could move around quietly without fear of anyone noticing her at all. It was hard to notice her at all, but only now. The window was left open, and a small breeze flew in. The girl felt a chill run down her spine, and her hair began to move. There was a man in a suit, apparently guarding something. He stood there, staring intently in front of him without missing a beat. His job was dangerous and difficult, so it required a lot of training. There was no one in the corridor, and the silence was too oppressive. Suddenly a shadow appeared from somewhere. The man didn't even have time to realize it before he saw his death moving towards him. The girl jumped at him, appearing literally out of nowhere. The man wanted to grab his blade, but he wouldn't have had time. His speed was simply not fast enough to match the girl. She flew at him like a hawk, and there was a sharp blow, and the man didn't even have time to scream before he died. Blood drops flew in all directions, left on the glass. The man was dead in a second. The girl acted like a pro. She'd been doing it all her life, and moving stealthily was nothing to her. A man is dead, lying on the floor choking on his own blood. A girl stands next to him, examining the scene of her crime. There were several bodies lying around. The men didn't even realize it. There were bloody footprints on the floor that stretched back to where the girl had gone. She was dressed in black, so she almost completely blended in with her surroundings, so seeing her was quite problematic. Staring intently out the window, the man stood with his back turned. His only concern was, why did the power go out in the house? His voice was shaking. Apparently he was frightened, still was. Someone had cut the power, and no one could figure it out. Suddenly a shadow slid behind him. He didn't even realize what had happened. He was still standing there talking on the phone. The girl appeared right behind him, so quietly that he realized it only when he felt it with his sixth sense. Who is she? Why was she here, and how did she get here? The man was frightened by the fact that it was dark here, and some strange girl was standing there. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the bloody blade the girl held in her hands. A chill ran down the man's spine, and he realized that something irreversible was about to happen. He didn't want to die. He opened his mouth and wanted to call for guards to prevent the inevitable. But the girl turned into a shadow and moved at him, and in one great leap shortened the distance. He wanted to scream, but all he got out of his throat was a gurgling scream. Drops of blood splattered on the wall. His throat was cut instantly. The man didn't even have time to call for help. Si-yeon looked at him over her shoulder. This was just one of her many orders. The girl genuinely enjoyed it. She was killing, and getting stronger and stronger. It was akin to entertainment for her. Now the next one! A triumphant smile appeared on her face. She would go to another order, and eliminate a man or woman or whatever, because that was a lifetime for her. The next day the weather was nice. Time to wake up and head out to get some new things to do. Now, the guy would have to concentrate on raising a normal dragon, not a real monster that the whole city and the whole country would be after. He got out of bed and stretched sweetly. He was in a great mood. The dragon was sleeping next to him, and apparently he wasn't going to wake up. The boy cast a lovely glance at him. The dragonkin was so cute that he smiled full mouth again. He summoned his artificial intelligence. Helen, what is the current status? The drone flew up with a whirring sound and replied that the stock price of CHVK was rising slowly and the overall return was. Guy said to let the intelligence let him know when there are more significant changes, and what about his classes? Helen replied that group raid fundamentals classes are at noon. The guy wondered, had the main storyline already started? He had time to prepare, and he needed to be on his guard. The boy got out of bed and moved towards the exit, telling his artificial assistant to look after the dragon while he was on business. Helen told the guy not to worry. Everything would be safe and sound, because of the fact that artificial intelligence can work in multiple places at the same time. But he thinks there's a limit to all these drones. However, it doesn't matter now. Gotta go. The guy waved his hand and said, "It's hard right now, but he'll get him a nice avatar soon." The drone thanked him. You have to take care of your subordinate points after all. The boy looked at his pet before exiting. Most bodies can't handle the mana of this creature. He thought dreamily about how there would be an ability to control its impressive bulk. That would be just wonderful. He went to the window and opened the skills window. Maybe there's one in the underworld. I'd have to check it out. He had a small sandwich in his hand. He needed a snack. The boy came closer and took a closer look. He probably saw something there that caught his eye. There was a message from the woman who was one of the company's executives. She said she wanted to meet right away. Looks like she's making a move, interestingly enough. That makes him feel better. After all, the girl checked him out and made sure he was telling the truth. The guy moved towards it. There was no time to lose. Finally, it was time. There was a reason he'd been so persistent. It seemed to have worked, and now everything was going according to plan. He put on his parade suit and moved forward. Here comes the end of the first part of his plan. All he has to do is get through today and try hard for a few days. Then it would work out. He didn't even doubt it. He couldn't have gotten this far here and screwed it up. The guy had gotten dressed, and now looked more or less decent. It might be easier to complete the first storyline without any problems. He was fully prepared for what awaited him there. Next, he came to the weapons testing site, or rather he was led there. He had met the girl, and now they were in a very strange building. It looked more like a military complex, which it probably was. The girl and several men in suits, including our hero, were there, and now they were to test what they had. The girl showed her hand and suggested that everyone else follow her, pointing to the testing center. Everyone agreed and moved forward. The girl walked ahead, her heels clacking on the floor. She was followed by the others. The men were completely in earnest. They had a very serious test ahead of them, and inside, the girl had mixed feelings. On the one hand, she was glad that she had bought the attributes, but on the other hand, it seemed to her that the purchase for her had cost more than she had planned. But judging from the joyous shouting from the research lab, it wasn't a simple waste of time and money after all. It was beautiful. Her company's research institute had a lot of skilled scientists. They had a lot to be proud of themselves for. Indeed, the men stood and marveled at this cube. Still, they are excited about these items. Not bad, not bad. Now, everything will be fine. At least the girl sincerely hoped so. The girl was wary. She couldn't believe that they were so many years ahead of their technology. Still, these magical paraphernalia were simply an incredible treasure. She was very lucky, and she didn't particularly regret spending the money. According to the researchers' assumptions, a sufficiently skilled mage of high class or higher would be able to figure it out. However, this guy who seemed to have invented these things was neither a researcher nor a high-ranking mage, just a hero candidate who had recently joined the academy. That was exactly the weirdest part. How did he even get that far? The boy continued to walk forward, the room staggering him with its size. It seemed to him that there was no end to this house. Had someone like him created it? What a golden goose! She literally marveled at this man. She literally couldn't believe that an ordinary guy could create such a thing. Han was just calmly walking around the room at this time and looking around. He would be an influential figure in the future. She had to get him, no matter what it would cost her. It was an incredible specimen after all. She had a real pride inside her for being able to obtain such a treasure like this. They went to the big tower, which seems to have been the main building on the premises. That's where the main experiments took place. As soon as the guy got there, he said that the place hadn't changed a bit. The girl was surprised to ask him that he had already been in such a place and testing weapons. The guy nodded his head, but when he was only the highest class, now it was a real discovery for him. The guy raised his hand up and asked, "Is it possible to raise the security level to 1? The girl was even a little startled. Security level 1? She didn't expect that. What did he bring with him? The entire test site is covered with a protective magical barrier that prevents anything from seeping in. If you raise the security level to level 1, dozens of barriers will appear, and hundreds of magic stones will vaporize. It is appropriate in a training ground of this scale. It would be a good thing." The guy pondered about it to himself. The girl hesitated and looked at him. "If you want to contain the shockwave and avoid further destruction when a kiloton atomic bomb explodes, you should use such a weapon." The guy apparently noticed the anxiety on her face and told her not to be afraid. "It's not a nuclear weapon." The girl agreed. Okay, she would request security level 1. She put her hand up and signaled. Yes, nukes would be too much. However, the effect is similar. They need to get ready. The guy nodded. As soon as the girl heard this, her voice trembled. She asked, "What did he just say?" The guy turned to her and showed her a small vial. The level 1 defense had been triggered. Worth being careful. The guy nodded and continued to smile. He was holding a small flask that looked like some sort of potion. However, it was very different. It certainly looked beautiful. There were magical runes and symbols painted on this flask. This bottle was filled with the magic of compressed space, so such precautions were quite appropriate in this situation. The guy tensed up. Besides the spells and releasing space and destroying magic, it also had a magic chain engraved on it. The guy wondered beautifully what she was talking about. They didn't come here to admire it, did they? It can only be called something beautiful in the dark lands when it's a bomb sweeping away tens of thousands of demons and devils. The guy came to the edge as if nothing had happened, and said that if everyone else was ready, we could start. The girl was frightened and asked him to wait. It was dangerous. However, the guy didn't seem to listen to her and continued to move forward. He went out to the testing grounds and in full confidence in his abilities continued on his way. In spite of the fact that there were people behind him who were overly afraid, the guy calmed them down and assured them that he understood and was aware of everything, so they had nothing to worry about. He kept going. The girl looked at him with a frightened look. She couldn't believe that something like this was happening here right now. Goosebumps ran down her spine. Khan stood at a fairly decent distance from them. He grabbed his vial and prepared to throw it. The guy had the most determined face. He didn't hesitate for a second. He had to prove his point. The boy stepped back a little to get a better run-up for a more accurate throw, standing firmly on his feet. He got ready. Swinging his arm around, the guy launched the vial of liquid as far forward as he could so it couldn't hit those standing there. The vial whistled, cutting through the air, and flew somewhere very far away. It seems Guy had done a good job and now it wouldn't hurt anyone. After flying a few dozen meters, the vial fell to the ground and shattered into many small pieces with a crunch. Light began to come out of it, though nothing happened for a couple of seconds. Then, there was a huge flash of blue light that began to consume the space around it. It began to expand, filling every available space on the base. Everyone else began to watch in horror. The guy put his hand forward and blocked the space. Compressed space and magic when released, sweeping away everything in its path. It's a powerful enough weapon to wipe out an entire generation. Now, however, it will only demonstrate a fraction of what this thing can do. The rapid explosion will quickly use up mana, so you need to constantly recharge it so that the mana doesn't run out and the magic barrier doesn't run out. Otherwise, there will be very colossal destruction. The guy kept feeding mana to this barrier. When the squeeze occurred and the mana gathered in one point, a series of explosions would occur, which would be equal in strength to an atomic bomb, even several atomic bombs. At this time, the magical energy continued to congeal into a single point. Soon enough, when enough mana hits there at one point, There will be an explosion so powerful that almost everyone here will be shocked. There was a flash. It would be a pure magical explosion. First came the sound wave, a slight pop, but it was heard by almost the entire city. The barrier there was holding everything back, but the force was growing stronger and stronger. This was going to be a pure magical explosion. The guy stood with his arm stretched forward. He was in the very epicenter of events. It was quite a dangerous venture. However, it was necessary to act according to the plan. Otherwise, if something went wrong, it would be a disaster. This is the reason why he is not in a safe zone. The boy stood and watched the magical energy completely envelop the local space. Well, here we go. The guy opened the information plate that had a lot of plaques on it. Resistance to magic storm has passed its limit. Overload of excessive magic. A high concentration of magical energy had formed. The skill level of magical superiority increased dramatically. An explosion of space with liberating space has begun. And the destruction of magic. The skill level of space control skill increases dramatically. A giant testing ground. A powerful barrier and talent. All the conditions have come together. Now the experiments will definitely go as planned. The blast wave continued to build up and a massive explosion was about to occur. The guy was standing in the middle of it, and he had a sparkling, triumphant smile on his face. He knew everything was going according to his plan. It was the perfect plan. This was it. The most effective way to improve skill required the work of a professional. And then came the explosion. It was so powerful it shook the earth beneath the entire city. The boy could hardly stand on his feet. Such was the force of the explosion that everyone's ears were instantly ringing. People thought it was the end of the world. But so far, everything was fine. And so, the experiment was over. When the dust settled, there was a big hole at the site of the explosion. Indeed, as if an atomic bomb had been missed and was now exploding here. The guy was standing here on a little ledge in relative safety. He held onto his hand, which was literally vibrating with tension. He could die like that. The guy was holding on and breathing hard. He was even a little scared at the moment of the explosion. But now it was over, and he realized that everything was okay. He held onto his hand, still in disbelief that he had succeeded. It wouldn't be a good idea to do it a second time. His arm hurt and appeared ready to fall off now. He rubbed his arm, trying to bring it to his senses. At least he got what he wanted. Magical superiority had increased many times over. Space control increased by another level. It was worth it! The guy happily looked away and checked the system specs as well. He tensed for a second. Otherwise, it would have taken him months to improve these skills. Luckily, he hadn't failed. He was able to make everything so that the benefit itself came to his hands. That's great. The guy had now grown in his own eyes. He began to feel even more proud of himself. He looked over his shoulder at the other people who were now looking rather frightened. What was wrong with them? I think they were very impressed. Everyone was standing there, superiors, scientists, and researchers. They all looked at the boy quietly and couldn't believe what was happening. There was a look of amazement and fear on their faces. The girl stood in front of him and opened her mouth in surprise. Her eyes were wide open too, unable to believe what had just happened. At the time of the explosion, the magic folded into a single point, and the pressure here was as if an atomic bomb was about to explode. Well, it kind of did. The guy was standing right there, right in the epicenter. I mean, it was incredibly dangerous. The others couldn't believe that such insanity could even be done in the real world. The girl could hardly stay on her feet. There was such a strong gust of wind, as if a 9-point storm had fallen on them. She covered her face so that dust and rock fragments would not get there. She was incredibly scared. Of course, the power of the weapon certainly impressed her to the core. She had never seen anything like it before in her life. Neither had the fact that he had created it himself. This was just a simple student. Even her top scholars couldn't reach this level for years, no decades. The guy was standing in front of a powerful explosion. A colossal amount of magical energy was flying in different directions, capable of destroying everything in its path. How can he even be standing there? He's just a man, right? Or not? Now, the woman doubted it. To what extent she doubted what she saw. She used to see him as a brilliant talent not to be missed, but now it seems her opinion has changed in some way. Now he appeared to her in a completely different light. Now she saw him as a man who definitely should not cross the road. She was impressed, frightened, and delighted at the same time. And the guy stood there as if he hadn't just created a colossal explosion that would have destroyed half the city if not for the magic barrier. Space compression and mana disruption. A guy was standing there holding his hand while shards of the earth fell from the sky and rose up in an explosion. He wields powers that could blow away any hero. That's really impressive. Now the girl was genuinely scared. She stood there for a few more minutes as if paralyzed. Everyone judges his abilities based on his YouTube videos. But hardly anyone realizes how much control he has over Manu. Naturally, the girl now realized he has a strength equal to no less than C rank. Such tremendous mana control. Right now, he's just a candidate. It's scary to imagine what would happen if he started to develop further. The girl was literally ready to fall through the ground from fear. She was really scared for the first time in years. She, who had seen many things, was so surprised for the first time in her life. She bit her tongue and wished she was somewhere safe. The girl tried to control herself. From what she had just seen, her hair began to move, not from the wind, but from fear. She began to approach him with a light, timid gait. She decided to make him her ally by all means, but never by force. Otherwise, you could have an enemy that would wipe you off the face of the earth with a single shot. The next day, the kid attended a group raid class. No matter how brilliant he is, you can't forget that he's just a candidate. The man stood in the middle of the large and spacious hall and explained the basics of raiding to the rest of the students. So, we'd better form groups to do the practical exercises. There were many students standing there who were focused on the teacher. This is quite an important teaching moment. Khan's son stood nearby and crossed his arms over his chest, listening to the teacher. Working together as a class to learn the mechanics of raiding. Yes, personal strength is of course important. But in addition to that, it is necessary to have a basic knowledge of teamwork to be able to defeat a strong opponent together. The guy couldn't help but notice that after he started using methods to make himself more attractive, he started getting more stares. Did he have surgery? Why did his looks get better? Now he's not such a nasty dot. Naturally, the guy heard all this and seemed pleased. He exhaled heavily. Yes, these remedies work. The boy was insanely happy that finally all this bullying would stop. They were starting to get on his nerves so much that he couldn't put up with this behavior anymore. He began to feel proud of himself. He had such good fortune for a reason after all. The attractiveness enhancer had worked perfectly. He finally felt he was being treated like a human being. Now the score has reached, that's about average. So now he'll have a better relationship with the others. Si Young was standing next to him. The girl was also listening to the lecture attentively. The guy was thinking, when you have points of attractiveness, he looks attractive. But when he looks like he stepped off the covers of fashion magazines. If you think about it, this girl's charm is over, right? However, her personality fundamentally changes everything. The guy's in over his head. This girl is a real problem. Yes, she is beautiful, but her character is just something, and in a bad way. He does not know only why so much spoil the player. Maybe it is such a hobby at the developer, or an attempt to adjust the balance in the game to ask. Fuck knows. It's not the time to think about it. The teacher continued telling the students the basics. He spread his hands and said that he would divide them into groups. There would be 10 in all, 5 in each group. It would be a perfect balance. The boy thought, the composition of the group should be basically standard. There should be 1 attacker each with long and short ranges, 2 assistants and a tank. I wonder what his role would be. He really didn't want to stand idle like last time. Group S composition. Tank Li Han Seong. A tank? That's not bad at all. He'll be a group tank, which means he'll be on the front line. Group long-range attacker An Hai Rim. No wonder, she's a bow attacker. Group long-range attacker Lee Ji Sung. He was ranked H on the rankings. Song Sa-young was a group short-range attacker, 8th in the rankings. Julia Martin, group 5 short course attacker, H in the rankings. Of course Julia wasn't happy. The girl stood and averted her gaze from everyone, as if no one was worthy of her looking at them. The teacher put his finger up and prepared to say something important. He asked for the students' attention so that they would finally be quiet. They have 1 hour to prepare a strategy and practice it. After that, they will have practice. Han sighed heavily. Oh, here we go. Thinking out tactics the moment this girl is in the group is simply an unbearable task. It's going to be difficult. Ahan Hai Rim. He needs just that. As good as it is that they got into the same group, this girl is quite capable and a good ally later on. But it's not like he's happy with the distribution. Julia Martin. The guy looked at her with a disgruntled look. Of course, it sucks that she's in their group. It's going to be a bit of a problem for him to even be around her, and he's going to have to work together. Well, there's nothing to do. The guy coughed and turned to the others. The first strike behind him is correct, for he is a tank. As he realizes, he will stand on the front line and cover everyone with his shield. Yes, the tank role was incredibly important in teamwork. It's almost the most important role. Taking the brunt of the damage, reading the enemy's attacks and finding weaknesses in them. The tank attack is one of the main parts of the battle. It should never be neglected. Julia hesitated, but seemed to agree. Even though this girl had a nasty temper, but that wasn't saying much. She still didn't want to get involved in a scandal. But did a candidate with a ranking have enough experience for such an experience? She didn't miss a moment to tease someone here either. Sho Young, standing next to her, whimpered. She has a double-digit rating and yet she's talking such nonsense. Julia heard that and got angry. What? She's talking crap? Wait a minute. Somebody's not smart or educated. The girls look like they've started a scandal. There you go, as usual. I think that's the most banal way to fight. Xiang was too snide. They cost each other. The girl said that she thought uneducated people were uneducated when they judged others by what they didn't know. But don't you ignorant people know that? Julia got angry again. Who's the ignoramus?
And this is coming from a girl who's a firebrand. Now they're gonna get personal, and then they're gonna punch each other in the face. and he's a short guy with no bones in his mouth. The guy stood nearby and listened to the whole scandal. Yes, at that moment he realized that teamwork is unlikely to work.
With guns in their hands, they are ruthless killing machines. But at times like this, they're more like children. And pretty stupid ones who fight all the time, no matter what the situation. Although they probably act like normal 17-year-old girls, don't they? The guy hadn't been that age for a long time, so it was basically new to him. Besides, he didn't know how normal girls acted, because everyone here was inadequate. Julia decided to hit the sore spot. She poked at the girl and said that she had an H place in the rankings, but her commander only had that makes all the difference. The girl tried to justify herself. Her rival waved her hands to the sides, and said that all this was of course true, for they were talking different people. The girl smiled. Probably for her, the 8th place is a joke, because there is always a guy standing on the 3rd place. Julia smiled, and tried to contain herself. All right. She thinks that with her on the team, the guy in the H place is not so terrible. After all, he achieved it by his own strength without having anything behind him. The girl hit the sweet spot. Okay, something very scary is about to happen. Shi-young kept quiet. It was her sore spot, and her rival knew she knew exactly where to hit to her heart's content. The girl tried to control herself, which was getting worse and worse each time. Julia looked at her and chuckled softly. She was already triumphant and celebrating her victory. Yes, that girl's tongue was sharp after all. Then she burst into laughter. The girl laughed from the bottom of her heart, no matter how black she was. Nothing to say, right? No matter who your family is, it can't compare to Martin Corporation or Denyan Gup. The girl said this while crying with laughter. What a bastard! The guy looked at her from afar and asked himself a rhetorical question. But what does this bitch want? What is she trying to get? I mean, it's stupid. Why would she do something like that? Suddenly, he felt a sudden sense of justice. Julia continued to laugh. She mocked her rival. Had she swallowed her tongue? How dare she even bring this guy into this? Se-young reached for her dagger. Her patience was running out. One more second, and the girl would attack her. Because everyone has a limit, and Julia was dangerously close to crossing that limit. Julia noticed the danger, too. A chill immediately ran down her spine as she saw her rival reaching for her dagger, most likely to finish her off in one blow. What a bastard! Why can't they live peacefully? I don't know what's so hard about it. Han, who was watching from afar, got scared. Hey, don't make this a funeral. It looked like something bad was about to happen. Knowing Shi-yeon's temperament, something really bad was about to happen. And he didn't want anyone from his future team to die right now, not even before the trial started. And there was nothing to be afraid of. The girl had turned into some kind of monster. She looked at her rival the way she usually looked at her victims. There wasn't much difference between the two of them. If the guy doesn't intervene in time, something terrible is about to happen. Okay, we have to stop this somehow. Otherwise, someone will definitely get hurt or worse die. The boy stood between them and put his hands out in different directions. It was a pretty dangerous idea. If the girls didn't calm down, he'd be in trouble. That's enough. We have to end this. The girl stood beside him, still burning with rage. He stood between two monsters that were ready to tear each other apart. Boy, seems like you picked a bad time to be a dove of peace. Shouldn't they fight like this? Shouldn't they prepare for the practical assignment first? Julia remained silent. Shi-yeon stood next to him and looked through him. The girl didn't say anything, just stared at her rival, and seemed ready to tear her to shreds. The guy didn't know why she was on his nerves today, but he couldn't let the gun entry go. What the hell happened to her? She wasn't herself today. The guy put his hand on her shoulder and suggested she start her own thing. It was better than cutting each other's necks. As soon as the girl felt his touch, she twitched a little in surprise. She didn't really like to be touched either. She immediately blushed and tried to look away, though it looked pretty cute from the outside. Okay, she seemed to understand, and there wouldn't be any more problems. Julia agreed too and nodded her head. The girl still wanted to fight a little, of course, but since she'd done it, she could be patient. The boy sighed heavily. He realized how close he was now to his own death. He didn't want it to end this way. Okay, that's taken care of. Now we have to start classes. He even flinched a little in surprise, fear still in his heart. It was just a little bit more, and something bad was going to happen. He didn't want it to end this way, but he'd have to live to practice at least. The practice was about to start. There was a little tension in the air, as all the students realized that this test would not be easy. They had to make every effort to prove. There were also fans sitting on the stands, who were watching with interest. One of the teams took the field. They were at full strength, and they were fully prepared to start the battle. Han Byul was the tank of the first group. The guy stood motionless and observed what was happening. His calmness was still at the same high level. Even though there was a monster in front of him, he didn't even raise an eyebrow. In front of him stood a monster, a rank T-Ses ogre, a huge creature with burning eyes. It was as tall as a multi-story building. It resembled something like the ones they had encountered in their first few days at the university. However, right now, their levels were almost the same. Han looked away too, and memories came back to his mind. It had been difficult to deal with 10 such creatures last time. An ogre for a group of 5 was not a bad level of practice, but it had been much more difficult and scary then. Okay, this one's manageable. The monster roared and swung his huge fist. The boy stood right in front of it, waiting for it to attack. The monster was rather slow, though its blows were incredibly powerful. The guy wasn't really afraid, though looking at the monster's fists that were the size of a small car, they inspired real fear. Now, one had to fear for his own life. The monster brought his fist to the extreme distance, and already prepared to strike. The guy was standing just a few centimeters away. He raised his hands up and tried to block the blow with his telekinesis power. He succeeded, and an aura appeared around him, blocking everything that was happening outside. The kid was visibly tense, yes, even though he had a high rank. But now he had to block the monster's attack that he had made right in the forehead. It would be difficult if he was a little weaker. Ogre took a swing but missed. The telekinesis worked perfectly. The fist flew a few centimeters, cutting the air. The boy was safe, even though he was on the front lines. He bounced to the side, and at the last moment a fist whizzed around his head. Another second, and his head would have been blown to pieces. He attracts attention with his telekinesis and dodges attacks. His efforts to attract attention annoyed the protagonist. Well, the monster staggered and fell. It seemed to have been defeated. There was a bang so loud it began to ring in my ears. Dust kicked up. The monster was defeated. The first group did a great job. The first group record was minutes and seconds. Not a bad result to start with. The guy was walking towards the exit. He looked pretty calm. Didn't seem to be a problem for him. There were whispers behind the protagonist. He was using telekinesis with one hand and magic with the other. How is that even possible? The guy didn't pay any attention to them, or at least tried to. He was thinking about something else right now. The record is less than 10 minutes. That's an incredible achievement for a new candidate. Not bad at all. The tank of the second group was Hong. It suited him just fine. The guy loved being on the front lines. The record of the second group was 10 minutes and 4 seconds. He had a very strong ability, but it took a long time because of the weakness of the support. Suddenly, the guy heard a familiar voice and immediately turned in that direction. It sounded like Nadia was there. She was supporting Keel. The girls seemed to really like this kid. He was incredibly popular. For a second, the protagonist flashed a small speck of envy. The boy was the attacker of his group. He walked forward with a confident stride, holding his wand in his hands. Long-range attacker, not bad. This guy's doing a good job at his job. Han looked at him sideways and squinted his eyes. He was naturally jealous of this guy, because he was popular not only with the girls, but with all the students. Okay, he'll become one. He looked towards the guy, who didn't even pay attention to him. Okay, he didn't even think it was possible to be that popular. Well, now's not the time to think about it. Popularity is a 10th thing. Keel began to fight. He dodged the attacks with incredible agility. It was like he was floating in the air. Not bad. The ogre couldn't catch him because his movements were too long. The guy bounced away. He took a safe pose. Next to him stood the swordsman, who for some reason was doing nothing. Why are you standing there, boy? Your group seems to be busy fighting a monster. Keel was in his element. The guy only seemed to be having fun. It brought him incredible pleasure. To think of fighting monsters, what could be more fun? The guy was at the peak of his glory. Now he had to perform at his best. He put his wand forward, which immediately started spewing out flames. It literally burst into flames, and the flames spread all over the place. The guy created several magic circles to strengthen his attack. Magic circuits appeared above his head, which began to burn exactly the same way as the magic wand looked mesmerizing. Han stood behind him and watched with wide-eyed wonderment. It was impressive, but he hadn't expected the newcomer to improve his magic so much. He looked at it with eyes like he'd seen something incredible, although he kind of did. He had gotten it, a special ability for magical copying. Was it really that fast? Several magical circuits hovered in the air, and were now ready to attack. He could use many copied spells at the same time. With 2 more improvements left, he would become a truly effective member of the team. He watched his opponent, and inwardly rejoiced for him. He had finally made up his mind. Keel was just attacking at this time. Nothing existed for him right now. He could become a very strong enemy later. We should be careful with him, at least try. Han is a little sad. He's been working on making them allies, but so far there hasn't been much progress. He doesn't see any progress yet, and he doesn't know if it's even possible. If this man becomes his ally, that ability will be a very good advantage in the future. However, the question remained, would he be able to win him over to his side? So far, the chances were close to 0, if not 0. Or was it better to kill him before he became his enemy? What kind of a stupid thought is that? Suddenly, the guy was pulled out of his thoughts by a voice. It was Shi Young, and he even twitched in surprise. Okay, he's reading too much. Let's get started. The girl was standing next to him, her irritation seemingly still lingering. She had a look of displeasure on her face. Okay, it's our turn, right? Then let's get started. The guy looked at Julia, who I was also on his team. It seems that after the recent quarrel, She was not going to take an active part in their battle, so we should just ignore her. I didn't need her help either. He could basically handle this monster alone, but he had to follow the rules. At the test site, he was able to raise his magic superiority to rank B and his spatial control to rank C. Not bad at all. The ogre is now one match for him, and he has a whole team. The Inuyok guy's a little hesitant, but since this was a team assignment, he wouldn't be pulling the whole blanket over himself. It was tiring. He really didn't want to get involved in these childish games, so he would have to finish this quickly if possible. He turned to his team and they looked at him in surprise. Well, 7 minutes should be enough. The guy said it with such tenacity, as if he was firmly convinced that he could take down this monster in minutes. He had a sparkling smile on his face, as he seemed to be completely confident in his abilities. The girls looked at him with surprise and disbelief. Was he out of his mind? Minutes? But the guy didn't pay any attention to it, because he was fully concentrated on finally finishing this circus. As long as he had the ability to control space, then they could finish even faster. He ran forward without hesitation. Okay, it's time to have fun. The girls didn't even have time to say anything. Ogre looked at him with his angry and even a little sad look. To be honest, I felt even a little sorry for him the whole time. He began to swivel his head around, looking for his new victim. The guy was running around him and didn't even think about stopping. All we have to do is use this skill to defend ourselves and crush him. It doesn't look complicated, so let's get started. Now he had the role of a tank, which meant he basically had no disadvantages. He was almost the most useful in the team. Ogre began to move towards him with very slow but at the same time wide steps. There was a rumbling sound. The guy ran straight at him, as if it was just a normal walk for him. The monster raised his fist up and prepared to attack this annoying guy. Khan has slowed down and is preparing to attack. We must take him down in one blow. The monster's fist was already flying straight at the boy. It seemed that if he hit someone with that hand, there would be nothing, and no one left there at all. Just my place. However, the boy didn't seem to be afraid of that at all. He put forward his shield, which he had created by distorting space, and his fist hit the barrier with a loud thud. The guy withstood it. It was nothing more than a slight jolt to him, and it seems the ogre was unprepared for the fact that it would not be able to crush such a small obstacle. The beast opened its maw and began to roar. He's angry because the attacks aren't working. He's used to defeating everything with one blow. Of course, even though the ogre had low intelligence, relatively low, he still didn't like it when the effect of the attacks was less than he had expected. This way, it would definitely focus all of his attention on himself. The monster continued to press with his fist, but there was almost no effect. He kept roaring and waving his arms around in an attempt to hit the boy. Not only was he faster, but his defense was pretty solid. He swung his huge paw and struck downward from above. Han was just there. He had managed to put up his defenses in time, and now the full force of the blow was upon him. The boy felt a tremendous force descending on him with every fiber of his being, and he felt like he was going to be crushed. What tremendous strength. The guy tried to hold on with all his might, and he was succeeding so far. He thought that Hong was fighting him with his bare hands. It's scary to imagine what will happen if this guy increases his stats. He's been trying to avoid direct attacks, but it seems that if he only defends himself, he won't last long. Too bad, we need to improvise, girls. We're a little late. The next time he dodged, he would need to attack with space control. The monster kept pressing him. Target his shoulders so he can avoid the fatal blow. Immobilize his arms, and then throw him to the ground. Okay, it's not easy, but it's doable. The boy stood in front of him and prepared to defend himself. Now! The monster swung his huge fist again. He wanted to finish what he had started. He was getting bored with it. The guy put his arm forward, and the space near the ogre's shoulder began to deform, and there began to appear a void that absorbed everything. However, Monster seemed to react at the last moment, and with some inexplicable feeling he sensed the attack. He took his hand away from the line of attack and dodged. He roared. The monster was furious. How was this even possible? The guy wasn't faintly surprised by this outcome. Did he reflexively sense the attack and immediately dodge forward? How is that even possible? Well, he missed. Turns out it wasn't as easy as he thought. However, it was enough to give the others time so that they could attack the monster. There were 2 girls standing behind him who were already ready to attack him. Yeah, the guy missed, but he managed to hit the monster with a point and ended up with a deep wound on his shoulder. The archer started firing her arrows at him. She hit the target accurately. The girl had Diamond's eye after all. The monster roared and tried to dodge the attacks, but it was not successful. He did not expect to be met with such a rebuff. The humans fought fiercely. The assassin was already behind him. She appeared literally from the shadows, and already prepared her blade to finish the monster once and for all. The girl in one leap approached the monster's back, and thrust her blade right between its shoulder blades. The monster roared, its huge mouth open to its limits. It didn't realize what was happening, and the girl seemed to be waiting for it. So Young smiled. This was true bliss for her. The girl loved to fight and kill stealthily. She had a sparkling smile on her face. She felt her superiority and liked it more and more. Guy watched it all from afar, noticing and analyzing the situation. He realized that the girl had become much stronger now. But could the rest of the group keep up with her pace? That was the question. Even if they had an advantage, it was unlikely that they would deal a serious blow to this monster. There was no end to it. It seemed that the attempts to break the record were fading away with each passing second. The monster held onto his injured shoulder, but did not fall down. It just needs to take its time to continue the attack. All right, I need to hold on a little longer to exhaust the monster. The guy took aim, tried to hit the other shoulder. That way he could immobilize it, or at least slow it down. He started distorting the space around the monster again. The ogre seemed to sense this and began to turn around. Where did it get that kind of agility? It just couldn't be you, could it? It's a huge, clumsy monster that couldn't move fast. The space distorted more and more. Ogre didn't seem to notice it, or didn't want to notice it because he was exhausted. Space began to distort, and immediately a hole appeared near his neck. In 1 second, the guy was able to do very serious damage. Blood came out of his mouth, you idiot! The boy was in shock. He wanted to hit him right in the neck to finish him off with one precise blow when he dodged another attack, but almost killed him. All right, we'll have to try it for a second. An Hai-Rim aimed and drew the bowstring of her bow to the limit. Now! It was necessary to shoot accurately at the target to hit this monster and finally stop this circus. The girl had good eyesight even though she wore glasses. She released the bowstring, and the arrow flew straight forward with a whistling sound. It was so deafening that it made some people's ears pop. The girl herself didn't expect to be able to shoot so fast. She was a little afraid of her weapon. The boys decided to concentrate their forces to work together to finally finish this thing off. Julia created a magic circle, which was ready to burst into flames any minute now. The girl squinted her eyes, and she wanted to finish it quickly, because being in a team with these people did not give her much pleasure. Shi-Young swung her sword, and a dark aura immediately formed around her. She had to act quickly, and this was something she understood as well as anyone else. And then, fire and dark matter clashed. Immediately there was a loud explosion. All that power came crashing down on the unfortunate orc. The monster was already resigned to his demise. Poor guy, I keep hitting him. He even had a slightly sad look on his face, as if he was saying goodbye to everyone. Okay, it's still a training exercise. That's what they're for. Now the monster stood very badly injured. Both of his arms and half of his neck had been tormented by spatial anomalies. His entire body was stabbed with arrows and shredded with a knife. He was still standing for a while, but it seemed to be short-lived. The monster fell to his knees with a loud sound, his strength slowly leaving his body. Even his thick armor that acted as skin could not withstand such an onslaught. The deed seemed to be done even faster than expected. The monster leaned forward, now slumped to the ground. It was definitely not breathing now. The monster ceased to exist. The boys stood for a while longer, watching as the monster fell. They didn't fully understand what had happened. Each of them was shocked at the speed. They didn't even expect such a result from themselves. Han stood in front of everyone and waited for the final results to be announced. Okay, if they didn't break the record, that would at least put the time in. The group record was minutes and seconds.
As soon as everyone heard this, they immediately jumped up from their stands and shouted with delight. How is this possible? How? It just can't be!
The guy didn't seem particularly happy with his score. Or no. It was a good score, but he seemed to finish too quickly. He had a grimace of dissatisfaction on his face. What a devil. Shouldn't have ended the battle so quickly. Having to proceed carefully, he can now feel the difficulty level of the game increasing. That's bad. It's not critical, but it's still bad. He sighed heavily. Well, there's nothing we can do about it now. We'll just have to make do with what we have. He ordered his drone to zoom in on the camera, and the artificial intelligence flew up too fast. The guy covered his face with his hand and theatrically started talking on the video. He thought it would take 7 minutes, but it was even faster. It was a regular thing for him to fight a huge monster. His face was literally glowing with joy. The guy said he did it in just minutes. He was literally glowing with joy. Perfect angle. Now he's gonna have a lot of fans. He grimaced and realized that he should put that picture in the preview. It should attract a lot of attention. Okay, I'll take care of that later, but now we have to wait for the results to be announced. The instructor stood in front of the rest of the students. Okay, we'd have to finish their practicum for today, and according to each group's record. The man said something, but the Khan did not listen to him. The others stared at him and waited for an answer. Basically, the day went well today. Though it went a little bit not according to the plan, but in general it was good. And trades in the morning also ended successfully. In general, it was possible to consider that all plans for the day were fulfilled. All that's left is not to fail in the rest. He transferred the patent for a set of attributes on the condition of receiving a 3% royalty on turnover for years. 3 mana burst bombs for billion. This group hardly had much spare finance left after such deals. All right. That didn't really bother him right now, since everything was in the slammer. The guy kept thinking, this deal for that woman is still more important than just money turnover. After all, with such achievements she could easily surpass absolutely everyone. It's a scientific discovery. There was a lot more ambition in this woman than she shows to the rest of the people. At first glance, it seems that she is completely satisfied with the position of the head of one of the departments. But in fact, since her childhood, she has wanted to head the whole company, but it seems that at this rate she will get it faster than she thinks. Moreover, it was very important for her to have their cooperation to achieve such a goal. Therefore, this transaction can be considered mutually beneficial. Developing a relationship with this person is pretty important if a guy wants things to work out the way he intended. Han stood near the others and thought. Nothing seemed to exist for him now. It would not only bring money, but also something else. For example, Gil Sung-hyun is the quickest way to build a trustworthy relationship with this person, because he listens to his sister, relatives after all. Okay, we'll have to deal with that. That way he could avoid becoming a slippery slope. The guy looked up from his scythe, but didn't seem to notice him. He's already started dreaming, and if he can convince Julia Martin, it'll be a jackpot. You're dreaming, kid. Okay, if you can do it, you can consider yourself lucky. Although it was extremely dangerous to pursue a relationship with that girl. On the other hand, it was better to be her ally than her enemy. Then we could avoid a lot of problems. She's got a penchant for crime from somewhere, but from where? She's from a good family. Why would she do that? He was completely immersed in his thoughts. Somehow he got the position of honorary lead researcher in this company. He has no responsibilities, only rights. His boss had gone to a lot of trouble to put him in this position, so he should be partially grateful to her. Is she trying to stay one step ahead by her actions? But it's a great chance to fix things with her brother anyway. It's worth a try. The woman turned out to be very tricky for him, so you have to be careful on the other side. It's complicated, so we'll have to be prepared. But suddenly the guy noticed something unexpected. He suddenly looked over to where his team was standing. Shi Young was just shining with happiness, but what's gotten into her? She acted like she had just been proposed to. What's wrong? What a boob she had on her chest. And where did she get all that pride from? And really, she was unrecognizable. Julia was standing behind her, and it looked like she was just a gray mouse against her. Something was definitely strange. That's why she's acting like this? It's embarrassing for the main character. Okay, it's still okay. It was her style after all. By the way, something should happen soon. All of a sudden, the whole building started shaking like a 9-point storm had started. Everyone else freaked out, and the main character was kind of calm. It's a normal story mission. So the plot progression was never cancelled. The guys ran out into the street, and horror was reflected on their faces. What the hell happened out there? Looks like someone attacked them. Except the guy had forgotten what was about to happen just now. Yes. They went outside and saw that the city was all on fire. Explosions could be heard everywhere. Clouds of black smoke began to rise into the air. What had happened here? Everyone was screaming. Everyone had a clear fright on their faces. No one had expected such a sudden and bold attack. And Han was the only one who was calm. It began. The boy looked away and realized what had happened. Main quest. You know who attacked the academy and what purpose it serves. Maintains security inside the building. Invaders, monsters, victims. It took 4 seconds for the attack to begin. All right, let's see. Explosions continued to rumble everywhere. It was a real war without announcement. The building went up in flames. Students screamed in terror. No one expected such an incident during the tournament. Yes, the difficulty of the main quest was high, due to the main game difficulty being increased. However, it was still all accomplished. Experience is more important than his knowledge now, because even minor changes can have unpredictable consequences. Suddenly the guy turned to Hunnenball. The guys seemed to wake up and looked at him. What's he up to now? He said in a worried voice that he thought they were under attack. And suddenly, we have to save everyone. Jin looked at him with surprised yet frightened eyes. The guys were a bit confused. Jin naturally made a fist and prepared to follow orders. He couldn't let anyone here get hurt. Baiul, on the other hand, stood motionless, as if that's the way it should be. Not a muscle in his face moved. The boy stood staring ahead, as if he knew what was going on but didn't want to tell anyone. Okay, we'll deal with that later. Then the guy turned to the others and asked them if they could save the victims. The guys, although scared, looked at them with confidence. Of course! Charles smiled and tried to come to her senses. The guy started looking around the neighborhood. The hardest part would be the last part. All right, if everything went according to plan, they had a chance to succeed. Suddenly, the boy turned to Julia and Keel and said they needed their help. Julia looked at him in disbelief. But the boy said nothing. He asked them for help, even though he didn't really want to do it right now. He didn't have a good relationship with these people right away. But, okay, you can't choose your allies now. The guy's ability to copy magic could be very useful in this case, and working together could bring him closer. He stood opposite the protagonist and didn't say anything. He didn't seem to really want to cooperate with them. Okay, that could be explained. They had a long history of animosity. The guy turned the other way and whirled his head around. No, he's on his own. The girl replied sharply that she was too. There you go, as he knew she would. All right, that's done with then. The guy threw up his hands. Okay, if they don't want to let them do as they please, but let them at least listen to what he has to say first. The guys crowded around him and started listening, some with fear and some with disgust. Right now, the academy is on lockdown. The guy started talking in a serious voice. He didn't look like himself. The guys looked at him with frightened looks, but there was nothing to do. They had to think about safety now. Hong looked at him with a frightened look. His eyes literally read incomprehension. What did that even mean? The guy kept saying, "No way to get out, no way to contact the others to call for reinforcements." Fear appeared on the faces of the others, as they must have just realized the dire situation. They have no other choice but to solve this problem on their own. If they don't, it seems everyone else will die. The guy opened up the academy's layout to make it clearer to everyone. He handed out maps to them. Bio looked at all this with disbelief. He still thought it was some kind of prank, but it was serious. Here are the points and people marked, plus the location. Still, the guy couldn't stand it and asked the protagonist how he knew all this. How did he get all these maps, all this knowledge? Han was silent for a while. He realized that he had blabbed a little. However, fortunately, the guy didn't question him. That wasn't what was important right now, however. After all this, he would be waiting for a detailed explanation. Han nodded his head. Okay, let him do as he pleases. Bio looked at him as if he was about to be eaten. It was obvious that the guy didn't trust him from the start. It was easy to explain. Okay, it doesn't matter for now. We need to worry about the safety of the others, lest there be a tragedy of even greater proportions. Of course, the protagonist realized that this man suspected that he was from the Darklands, but that was unimportant right now, to say the least. Although he thought it was just a guess, he would deal with that later. Then, he turned to the others. Sergei, Charles, and Xia Young should take care of the apartment. We need to keep people safe, most importantly not to let anyone die, or at least minimize casualties. Xia Young was unusually calm and focused at this moment. It wasn't even like her. She was looking at him with serious eyes. She had a lot of things to ask him, but now was not the right time to ask them, so she would deal with it later. There were more questions than answers. The girl stood and listened intently, a look of admiration in her eyes. He scrubbed the scope of the attack, the target. He knew even the information that her family didn't, but from where? It's all so scary and strange at the same time. She made up her mind after all, and called the guy by name, so that she could still ask him about how he even knew all of this. Ask sign girl wanted to know as much as possible at once. The guy just waved it off. He said he would explain everything to everyone later. It didn't matter at all right now. The guy didn't look like himself. He was calm and serious. Such an expression was not peculiar to him. The girl nodded understandingly, but deep down she was even a little offended at him for being so rude. Okay, but then she would ask him all the necessary questions and find out everything. Deep down, the guy was glad that Charles and Sergei trusted him enough not to ask unnecessary questions. After all, it was quite a distraction from the usual business now. Besides, it was impossible to cause panic in Balagan. Han turned to Keel and said that if he didn't know the location, he had a map. The guy slid the clipboard toward him, but the man turned around and said in a firm voice that he had it roughly figured out. He didn't even say anything last. He just turned around and walked off with Julia. What a rude guy. The guy was left standing there, and he was very offended. Well, it wasn't that important now. The balance of power was evenly distributed enough to deal with this threat. All that was left was to save the survivors and keep the rest of the people alive. That could have been handled with what they had. The boy looked around. One last thing then. There was one more squad member left to take with him to fully balance the forces. He walked up to An Hai Rim Ai and held out his hand to her. He asked if she could help him. He tried to be as friendly as possible to make the girl feel comfortable. However, as soon as she heard his voice, and such a request immediately freaked out. He needs her help, begging sign. The girl began to stutter. Yes, he needs her help. He stood in front of her and literally begged. The girl stood there, not knowing what to say. On the one hand, she wanted to help because she was scared, but on the other hand, she hardly knew him. She was already scared, but now she was even more scared. The guy was trying to look as friendly as possible to get the girl to warm up to him. Needed to communicate as affectionately as possible. If she doesn't want to help, that's pretty fucked up. He said it would be hard for him to do it alone. But if she helped, they could do it right. Besides, they needed an archer. And he didn't know anyone who could shoot better than that girl. Yeah, she's a candidate without much combat experience, or really any experience at all. She's very shy, so she doesn't like to be involved in something like this, and it's very scary for her right now. If he invites her to the team now and asks for her help, he'll be more than likely able to unlock her abilities and win her favor. It would be nice for me to be assertive. He asked her in as friendly a voice as possible, so as not to scare her in any way. The girl trembled with fear and began to stammer. She said in a pitiful voice that she was a little inexperienced. Her knees were shaking. It was obvious how worried she was not only about the situation, but about being invited to the rescue team. The guy said in a calm voice that all she had to do was just cover for him. But so what, she can do it. Can you? The girl tried to come to her senses. She clenched her hands into a fist and thought about the answer. She was scared, but she wanted to prove herself and be useful somehow. She thought she was tired of being shy. In a stammering voice, she said if it was just to cover, she'd do it.
As soon as the guy waited for an affirmative answer, he grabbed her hand. Good. That's enough already! The girl didn't expect such a push, and shrieked in surprise. Somebody said he wouldn't be pushy. You're a tank!
He grabbed her arm and dragged the poor girl after him. Before she could even realize it, the guy was already dragging her as hard as he could. Well, we'll see what happens, but it doesn't look good. Follow me, the guy shouted, and dragged her after him. The academy was overcrowded with people. There was panic. People were trying to find a way out. However, there was no way out. People were trapped. Now they were furiously trying to survive. Fear, even genuine terror, was evident on every face of those present. They opened their signs and tried to check the map to find a way out of the room, but they seemed to be closed like canned food in a jar. Someone tried to break the barrier with magic, but it did little to help. The barrier was as if impenetrable. They were closed here so tightly that even the strongest magic of skillful mages of the highest rank was useless. Jung Hyun was sitting there trying to break the magic barrier, and she didn't seem to be very good at it. Do Seok walked over to her and asked her if she had failed so far. The woman looked at him with a doomed look. As soon as she heard the question, she lowered her eyes and waved her head doomfully. No, it didn't work. The barrier was so strong that it was almost impossible to break through. She said that this barrier limits the ability to get out and in here. There was a clear concern in her voice. Even a woman with such combat experience and such skills couldn't handle this barrier. And also, this barrier is blocking any signals and sounds. They're literally locked in. A barrier of this type can only be deactivated if all instructors have a hand in it. They can only have one goal, the man thought, and his gaze became serious for a moment. He seemed to understand. Whoever attacked them could only have one single target. The candidates, disciples who are more likely to get caught in a jam. The woman became serious. She understood the danger of the situation, but unfortunately none of the teachers had anything to counteract it. She leaned over to the barrier and got a better look at it. Even if they started destroying it now, it would take a lot of time. It would take at least hours. You could lose all the students in hours. It was an unacceptable luxury. There had to be another way, something faster and more efficient. There was only one way to destroy the portal faster. The man looked at her with a look of anticipation. Is there some other way? The woman sighed heavily. Apparently that option wasn't a good one either, but it wasn't much of an option. They didn't have much of a choice. Apparently she was tired herself. She wanted to stop. It was too dangerous here. The only way to stop this madness was to break the barrier from the outside. If there's a top-ranked magician who understands magic circuits, he'll figure out these circuits in 3 hours, so it's no big deal. The man clenched his hands into a fist. Somehow she claimed it was impossible. At least in today's reality. But there must be a way. He drew his sword and moved forward. We needed to at least secure those inside. The other way they would deal with it later. I looked at him from behind. She sighed heavily and said it was the only shortest way to reach the goal. Okay, somehow we have to try. However, the man seemed to have a different attitude. If there was no other way out, he would solve this whole problem by force. On the other hand, why else would there be warriors here? He held tightly to his sword and realized that it was up to him now. In that time, accidents could have already happened. He couldn't wait any longer. The man put his sword forward and moved forward. It would be necessary to at least save the others, not let them die. However, there was only one question on his mind. What the hell? It's just not possible. The man thought for a moment. Who would create a barrier of that magnitude? It was simply beyond comprehension, wasn't it? He stood in front of the impenetrable and tried to do something about it. It was important to understand how they were able to prepare it in plain sight. How could they even hide a dome of this size? An unpleasant thought popped into his head. The enemies could be anywhere. If he was among them, that made it more difficult. How could he find a person in such a large number of people? There were just too many of them here. In any case, they didn't have much time. They would think later. The man charged his sword with magical energy and swung. He ordered everyone to step back so no one would get hurt. If you can't break the barrier with one method, there is one action. Force. His blade began to burn with blue flames. It was literally overflowing with magical power and energy, transformed into a glowing blade that seemed to be able to break anything in its path. It was a sky-splitting blade. The man swung his arm and prepared to deliver a devastating blow. The weapon suddenly glowed with a red light. The man took aim. One had to put all his strength into this strike. The art of the fire god of destruction has 3 levels. The first one crushes mountains by breaking them into little pieces. There's nothing left of them afterward. The second divides the oceans to form land. Such power would be unbelievable. And the third, the strongest, which nothing can match. It divides the heavens, which later become rifts. The man held his blade in his hands and prepared to strike. He had signed a contract with a high-ranked deity, a small monster tearing the sky to shreds. And this was his best skill he had gotten by becoming a ranked hero. He gathered all his will into a fist. Now the lives of many people depended on whether he could break the barrier or not. With maximum concentration, even with his rank, he couldn't fully control this power. So he needed to keep those around him safe at least. If he overdid it, he could lose an arm. He didn't want that. Men should have complete control over their emotions and energy so that they don't do anything unnecessary. However, if he should sacrifice his arm to save the other candidates, he would easily make such a sacrifice. It wouldn't be too bad. The man seemed to be completely willing to give himself to this element. Level 1! His sword began to glow even more, just a second more, and he would deliver his devastating blow. The man tightly gripped the hilt of the blade that was already red hot to the extreme. Now it seemed that even his body was heating up proportionately. He swung around. He was scared in his heart. If he failed, they would simply have no other option. What the hell is this? He took even better aim, and there was a loud bang. It hit the barrier. It managed to shatter it, but it seemed to regenerate immediately. Sparks flew in different directions, and the man squeezed his eyes shut to keep from going blind. The whole place shook, as if the heavens were about to part. Is that his limit? The man was even a little disgusted by the realization. He can't cut through the barrier. It's too strong. Who made such a monstrous construction? The man clenched his teeth as hard as he could. He needed to try his best, for the students' lives were at stake. He would need to put in even more effort. Even if he lost an arm, he didn't seem to care at all. The only question he had now was, how many students would be able to survive? The man cursed hard and prepared himself. He had already resigned himself to the fact that he would have to lose a limb if he struck with such force. All right, if he had no other choice. But it was still scary. Suddenly he heard something inexplicable, some of the sounds leaking through the barrier. Were the restraints starting to break down? Well, if that was the case, good. He should keep at it and he might even get somewhere. The man realized that if he kept attacking, something might work. A small hope awoke inside of him that things might work out after all. Well, it's worth it to keep going. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared from the gap formed and ordered his sword to be lowered. What a jerk! The guy was frightened, and even worried about something. The man hadn't expected such audacity, but even more, he hadn't expected anyone to appear from behind the barrier. What the hell did he say? Punk! The man even got a little angry. He didn't think this was a good time. Suddenly, the poor man felt like he was going to faint. The man had overdone it after all, and now he would have to try hard not to faint. The sword had absorbed too much of his strength, and now he was fainting. He began to hiccup, and soon collapsed without moving. Poor guy. And he just wanted to save the others. The sword had absorbed too much of his energy. His eyes began to darken and his mind went blank. All right, so be it. But he seems to have succeeded. The handle of the weapon slipped from his hands, and the dagger fell to the ground with a loud thud. The man was finally lost to knowledge. Then his thoughts became confused, and darkness began to appear before his eyes. There was a thud, and the man felt himself fall to the ground with a loud thud. That's it. The force had left him completely. And now there was no telling when he would regain consciousness. Outside, the battle continued. The acrid smell of smoke could be heard everywhere. People continued to scream in fear. Some students had managed to hide, and some were still looking for shelter. It was extremely scary here, but everything could still be turned to one's advantage. Just make sure that as many people as possible survived. There were some strange creatures flying around that looked like a mixture of a bat and a bird. They were leaving behind some kind of indistinct markings, and they were screaming loudly. It was disgusting. Also, there were our old familiar ogres chasing the humans. They were still just as huge and intimidating. The people who were standing there started to run away in terror. Run! It was chaos all around. They didn't even know where to go after such a thing. Han and Rim ran forward. They had to get there just in time, or the others would die. The boys were extremely excited. It was the first time they had ever been so excited, and each of them had goosebumps running up and down their spines. They ran into the meeting room. The first thing that caught their eye was the large barrier that was blocking the entire room. Predicted. No one had escaped yet. Everyone stayed locked in there. The guy said he would break the barrier for now, and let the girl cover him. She looked at him with a serious look, even though she was scared. She only wanted this nightmare to end. Monsters were everywhere. It was extremely dangerous. Ordinary people couldn't handle them, and the students weren't strong enough to stand up to them. Okay, something had to be done. Even though he had prepared magic stones, it would be difficult to break the barrier. The guy sat down closer and started to chemically work on something. The girl shot her arrows straight at the target. The monsters fell one by one. For now, she had to buy some time for the guy while he tries to break the barrier. One of the flying creatures fell with a loud scream. -1, however, they weren't getting any smaller. The girl watched in horror as the creatures fell one by one. She was very scared. Her knees were trembling, however, there was no choice. It was necessary to relocate her fear to finally fight them face to face. Well, whatever it took, she had to try. Otherwise, it would all be for naught. The monster dropped dead, now that flying thing can't kill anyone. Okay, there was still something that could be done about it. The girl transferred her fear and continued shooting at the monster. The girl shot at the monsters one by one. She hit the target accurately. It was as if something had changed in her, and now she looked completely different. The guy was worried, but she's a great fighter. He could now devote all his time to eliminating the fucking barrier. The guy immediately set about it. Sooner or later he realized that he would manage to break it after all. The only question was how long it would take, and whether the girl would have time to cover him for so long. But if he hurried, he might be able to do something. He had to hurry, or this asshole would lose his arm through the wall. The guy took out 2 magical circuits and started working hard. He couldn't let this guy get hurt. It would go wrong, and then it would be even worse. He knew the man wouldn't stop. This teacher is the only one who currently has a contract with a heavenly demon at his level. There's a good chance that he will lose his right arm and fall into despair afterward. This could have very bad consequences. He can sacrifice his hand to break the barrier on the other side. That's already a little bad. He prepared a magic orb. He had very good talent, and after that, there will be initiative to move up to the next higher rank. If he protected his hand. The boy tensed up. There was no time to waste. The consequences could be extremely dire if he didn't hurry. Okay, he would deal with it. That was for sure. Suddenly the guy felt a vibration and was a little distracted from his work. He even felt a little uneasy about what was happening. Did that idiot think to hit? The vibration spread further and further. He's using his sword. There can be no mistake. The guy's scared. He's got to speed up. If he doesn't, this could get pretty bad. That's the last thing we need. The man definitely started using his sword. He held it with one hand and charged it with all the energy he had at that moment. Everything around him continued to tremble. Han was trying to break the barrier as soon as possible. Otherwise, whoever was standing on the other side would surely lose an arm. That was all that was needed. The girl stood behind him and covered him with all her might. And why's the barrier so complicated? The boy couldn't understand a thing. It's not normal. It shouldn't be like this. He had to finish before he put all his strength into the last blows. The guy tensed up even more. He didn't care how long it would take. The main thing was to finish faster. He put all his strength into his magic circle, and something began to work. The barrier slowly began to melt, and parted in front of him. A small crack appeared. There's hope.
Oh, great! He's broken part of the barrier! All that's left is to make it! There was only one thought in my head. I just have to make it!
Wait! The guy thought there was only one thing he needed to do right now. Stop this asshole from hurting himself and ruining everything. Can he even hear him? The boy peered inside the barrier. The slit was starting to widen, and there was already a wide enough passage for the small man to climb out. Are you sure he can hear him? Okay, I've got to get through to him somehow. Still had to get inside. At least a little bit, so that the guy could slip in there, and only then could the man hear him. He tried harder. At one point he managed to push the barrier apart enough to get part of his face through it. Now all that's left is for him to yell at the man. Stop your ball, asshole! As soon as the man heard himself being addressed so rudely, he knew immediately who it was. The candidate. What did he say? How dare that brat talk to him like that? Staring intently at the boy, a wave ran through the man's body. He felt the force leave him. The sword slipped from his hands, and he fell to the ground. The man began to lose consciousness even faster than expected. He couldn't stay on his feet. But they didn't, and the man felt himself falling to the ground. All his strength was gone, and thank God, there'd be less chance of him hurting himself. The blade fell to the ground and rolled with a clatter somewhere in the distance. The man was lying on his back and could not feel anything at all. He was unconscious, and now it's going to take a lot longer than planned for him to regain his strength. But nothing. Thank God the boy was able to avert disaster. The man was unharmed, and that's the most important thing. His arm is still in place. Great! We must hurry and destroy the rest of the barrier. He put all his efforts. It was difficult for him. Yes, however, there was no right to make a mistake. If everyone dies here, it's going to be very difficult. Eventually, and people a few at a time started cautiously going outside. The guy sneaked inside and started looking around at everyone. There were 2 teachers inside. The woman thanked him for saving her. The guy waved his hand away and said it was no big deal. He only did what he had to do. He wanted to save everyone. However, the woman was surprised as a boy, an ordinary student. It took more than a good knowledge of me to be an expert in these schemes. She seems to be asking if purely out of curiosity. Okay, maybe I should tell her. The guy tried to explain. He grinned radiantly and said he had a part-time job making things like the Great Magical Defense Circle. He might as well be familiar with it, so let him apply. The guy put a finger up in front of him. Now the guy said he was really busy, so I'm sorry we have to run away. He turned around and ran in the opposite direction. The woman wanted to ask something else, but the guy ran so fast that she only had time to shout. Hans sighed heavily. If he had stayed there for even a second longer, the woman would definitely start bombarding him with questions, and he didn't want that. He'd have to go back and check on his friend. When the guy got to the spot, he saw the girl standing alone. At least there were no monsters in sight. The girl was breathing heavily and looking away. Her face has changed. It's like she's more courageous. She could handle monsters all by herself? Amazing. Guy tensed. If he tried another way, her second personality should awaken. Okay, time to get started. He tensed and looked at the girl carefully. The panic continued even though they had succeeded. Well, only partially. There was still the smell of smoke, and there were still many monsters that threatened the lives of ordinary people. No time to relax. The protagonists, along with their assistant, ran straight ahead. There's someone else to deal with. Main quest. You know who attacked the academy, and what the goal is to keep and safe inside the building. Invaders, monsters, victims. Time elapsed since the attack, hours, seconds. The guy looked at his plate. He had been fiddling with the barrier for about an hour. Everything seems to be doing great so far, and maybe it can work out. They are all doing a great job with their assigned duties. That's great. He can finally rest easy. The guys did a great job. Now he's got a major mission. All right. Next destination. This is the next mission. They went to a lab that was nearby. It was the Academy's engineering research lab. It was a large and spacious building where magical experiments were usually conducted to improve weapons or create something else. The treasure hidden in the director's research lab. The heart of an ancient giant. It could be the target of the attackers. We need to find it as soon as possible and take it to the safe place, or everything will go to one place. A small group of high-ranking invaders could probably get in there easily. Besides, he saw them heading that way. He could stop them and take the item for himself. The boy ran as fast as he could. His physical abilities seemed to have increased a bit, so he could move so fast. This time he'll stop them for sure. Not like last time, no. He won't make that mistake again. Someone's heavy footsteps echoed across the plane of the building. Someone was coming fast. The lab had already been broken into. There was blood on the floor, as if someone had already been here. The people who were supposed to guard the place were already dead. Someone had gotten into the lab and killed the people without anyone noticing, so there was no one left to guard the treasure. Two men in black robes walked forward. One of them said in a gruff voice that he had already gotten rid of all the guards, so there was basically nothing to worry about. Okay, then everything's going according to plan. Their faces were hidden by hoods, the darkness covering them almost completely, so it was impossible to tell who was in front of us. They were advancing, only a few meters to go. They had found what they were looking for after all. After a few meters, they reached the vault, which was where the heart of the giant was. The people stopped and began to stare in a daze at what was happening there. The heart was literally levitating in the air. People stood frozen in place. They couldn't believe that they had made it to this place after all. The heart of an ancient giant. This item looked rather strange, however. It was the item that was their target. It was simply amazing. The main treasure of the academy. Now it would only be in their hands. One of the men prepared to take the object. It was already almost in their hands. All that was left was to hold out their hand, and this incredibly valuable item would be theirs alone. The man pulled off his mask, and a fairly young face came into view. It was Jonathan, a high-ranking Shadow Wolf mercenary, and besides, even if only temporarily, they would have incredible power with this value. The man squinted. Had he heard somewhere that this was an item used by the highest-ranked heroes? Was it really like that? The heart kept levitating. This was only half of it, but even so, it wasn't easy to get it. After all, this is a direct way to become the highest rank. As soon as the man spoke of this, a small shiver ran through his body. He literally couldn't control himself from anticipation. However, a life was more valuable than some treasure. So we can't deviate from the plan. If they screwed up, everyone would die. They shouldn't have taken liberties. He ordered the others to find a way to break the defenses. The men nodded their heads and scattered in different directions looking for the key to remove the defenses from him. Jonathan already had a rough understanding of how the defense system worked. For a while, he had been able to get in here and find out the logic behind it. After all, it was impossible to come here without training. Everything was very well guarded, and an untrained person would die even on the way in. He's ordered the rest of yours to go on defense. The rest of you, search for the head of the research center. The men nodded their heads obediently. They were used to listening to their commander without question, because it was because they listened to him that they were alive. Without that scholar, this subject is useless. Jonathan understood that. They could cripple his legs, but let them catch him alive. The men nodded their heads and immediately ran to find the right person. Suddenly, a man rushed towards them, probably a surviving guard they hadn't noticed. The man held a blade and ran straight at the invaders. He was determined to stop them, even though he knew in his gut that the odds were stacked against him. As soon as the man was close enough, Jonathan swung his arm, and in one swift and precise blow, knocked him to the ground. The man immediately blacked out. The blow was quick and precise. The invader grinned. Someone else from the guards. Interesting, but it's okay. They'll get over him quickly now. He moved his eyes a little lower and noticed something strange. In place of the guard he had just knocked out lay a strange bottle. It was bright blue in color and had runic symbols painted on it. He had never seen such a thing before. It looked like a potion, however it looked very different. Yes, the man thought it was a potion bottle. He walked a little closer and took a closer look. It looked strange, but he had to check it out. He didn't seem to realize what danger awaited him. As soon as he approached the sufficient distance, the bottle was activated and a loud explosion was heard. The man did not even have time to react. The guys stood around the nearest corner and watched the whole thing unfold. Everything seemed to work out. They didn't give themselves away. 2 of them? When did they have time? That's all the man had time to think before he vanished literally before his eyes. His jacket could not protect him from such magical effects. The man was scared, but there was nothing he could do. His whole body literally began to burn. After such a powerful explosion, all that was left of his head was an empty space. It vaporized in a split second, and now, the headless man stood still. He died instantly. What is this? That's all the man could think before he died. A crackling sound was heard, and the air was filled with the foul odor of fallen flesh. The man died instantly. The boy looked back at him. The man was dead. His lifeless body fell to the floor with a loud thud. It was a little creepy to realize that the man had literally vanished. And now, for the first time in this life, he had to use his invention to kill. He was still hiding behind the nearest column with his girlfriend. It was a good thing he let his guard down, figuring it was just an ordinary potion bottle. He lowered the power, but it could even easily kill a high-ranking individual. He told the girl to go inside. There was only one mercenary left. The girl motioned for him to follow me without saying a word. She was pretty scared. She felt like someone was always watching them. She whirled her head around and was ready to go into battle. Her gaze fell on the corpse of a man lying nearby. It was a heartbreaking sight. The girl was not ready to see such an abomination with her own eyes. She was not used to seeing death, or rather not used to facing it. She yelped and squeezed her eyes shut in horror. The girl hiccuped in fear, and it seemed like it might give her away. She squeezed her eyes shut hard enough to get some sense of normalcy. Han heard it and grabbed her by the shoulders. The boy began to shake her to bring her to her senses. "There's an enemy ahead. Pull yourself together," the girl said in a frightened voice that she would try. Suddenly, the boy felt that something had changed. It was as if the girl had been transformed, and her body became stronger for a second. She stopped, and stopped panicking. He looked at her with a steely gaze. The kid felt that this situation had a definite effect on the girl. Yes, come out and. A different personality. Is it really going to be so long to wait for this? The girl managed to pull herself together, and said in a quiet voice that she would remain calm. What was that begging sign that came over her? Is it now? But at last, we've been waiting. She picked up and took off her glasses. The girl wiped her eyes and tried to concentrate. I think something's about to happen. The girl's face changed. She looked in the direction where the corpse was lying, and for a couple of seconds, she didn't realize that she was seeing a dead person in front of her. She thought it wasn't real, that it was all just someone's imagination. And now she'd wake up, and everything would be fine. For a few seconds, she didn't realize what had happened. It seemed to her that it was all going to end now, that it was all someone's stupid joke. The girl stared at the corpse. She felt a little creepy, and then a small, nasty shiver ran through her body. Once the girl looked closer and finally saw what lay before her, she exhaled sharply and heavily. Her breath came in spurts. She couldn't believe what she saw in front of her. Again, fear took over her whole mind. She felt like she was going to die of fear. Something very scary inside her was beginning to awaken. The guy noticed her fear and confusion. But there didn't seem to be time for that right now. He looked at her over his shoulder. You won't get killed. They'll kill you. You must understand that. There's no other way out. That's life. No matter how much you don't want to believe it, that's the way it is. The girl was scared to death. She looked at the corpse and her mind was turned upside down. She thought she was going to die of fright. She wanted to be somewhere else, anywhere but here. However, to his surprise, the guy felt a shiver begin to run through his body as well. What the hell was this? It's never happened to him before. I would say that he was afraid. However, why is he trembling? The boy looked at his hand. It was shaking just like the girl's. Looks like her skill is affecting those around her. It's a nuisance to have to deal with, but he'll do his best. We need to keep moving forward and not forget the final mission. Besides, there's a mercenary still walking around. It was perfect for a large-scale battle. She's almost awakened. Was it really going so well? It was even faintly believable that things could be going so well. The guy was just overjoyed. He stood a few meters away from the hooded men. They stood still for now and made no attempt at action. They were biding their time for now. The people were extremely dangerous, of course. To deal with them would take a lot of effort, and the guy understood that very well. He took a closer look. 2 B-ranked fighters. Okay, it would be difficult to deal with them, but it was possible. One of them had drawn a long sword and was now preparing to attack. The boy decided to take the initiative into his own hands and moved forward. He ran at them like he didn't feel threatened. Let's see who's stronger. Han didn't seem to be afraid of anything at this point. Their swords clashed. There was a loud clang of metal. Then they started the battle. The guys fought not for life, but to the death. It seemed that this fight depends not only on their lives, but on the lives of everyone in this world. Yes, it was exactly a rank B mercenary. I just in practice to confront such an opponent, really. It's one thing to train in a safe training facility, and quite another to confront a skilled fighter's scientific kill. Okay, we can still deal with that. The main thing is not to fail at the right moment. The mercenary stood across from him. However, how much fun he was having. He suddenly felt a surge of strength. Why would that be? He was fighting with his opponents, so why does he feel like this is some kind of game? Suddenly, something whizzed past him at breakneck speed. The guy didn't even have time to realize anything. Some shadow just slid past him. It's rushing forward right towards the man. It took his breath away. Come on, is that really what he was thinking? Something flashed in front of him, and suddenly, the boy was almost blind. He was even a little scared for his life for a second. He hadn't expected that someone or something could move that fast, though inside himself he already knew who it was. The girl who just a few minutes ago was modestly shy and timid now looked like a real fighter. She was unrecognizable. Looking at her from the outside, one would think she was some kind of elite assassin, even insane. Her expression changed. The mercenary didn't expect this you-know-what and didn't even know what to take. The girl was fighting him like a madwoman. She swung her sword, and multicolored energy waves scattered in different directions. The mercenary tried to retreat. He realized that it seemed he could not cope with such an onslaught. Without expecting it, he began to fight at full strength. The man swung his sword to protect himself from imminent death, and sent an energy wave directly at his opponent. A purple energy wave flew out. One more second, and the girl would be dead. However, the energy wave flew just a few centimeters away from her head, and only lightly touched the ribbon that bound her hair. It immediately disintegrated. The small flap fell to the ground, and the girl remained standing still. She didn't even seem to move. Her hair was loose, and now it was falling down to her shoulders in lush curls. The girl was completely transformed. There was no trace of that girl left. She was no longer shy, timid, and the one who was afraid of everything in the world. Now it was a real assassin. Her face had changed beyond recognition. Now it glistened with madness. The girl looked at her rival like prey, her eyes glittering with rage. Nothing seemed to stop her now. Even Han was beginning to fear her. That was unexpected. She dropped her arrows and picked up a sword. Why did she suddenly switch weapons? There was nothing to understand. One of the main character's multiple personalities had been awakened. Another personality of an assassin appeared. The assassin's active qualities. The assassin's strength. Physical strength has increased by 1.5 times. People around him are affected by the skill. The boy laughed. He was incredibly pleased. Finally, her second personality was revealed. Now the guy was ready for anything, but not this turn of events. And he, like me, her ally gets evicted. Now they'll easily defeat these killers. Speaking of which, people were starting to crowd in and seemed to realize their chances were getting slimmer and slimmer. They were terrified, shivering like some little leaves in the wind. People began to look among themselves, and it seemed the only right decision was to retreat. Now the girl who a second ago was afraid to take an extra step turned into a real killer. She looked at people like a predator. Now there was only one thing for her, the desire to kill. There was an energy spreading from her that would make anyone afraid. They must be in turmoil because of the change. Now the most unexpected thing happened. One of the mercenaries couldn't stand it after all and ran for the exit. Curses! The man realized they couldn't withstand such power. The second mercenary was more confident, however, and lunged at the girl with his weapon. He hoped to catch her off guard. He didn't seem to mind that the girl had turned into a monster. All right, let's see how she handles him. This is going to be pretty fun. The man swung his blade, but his speed still wasn't enough to even get close to the girl. She jumped up, and in a second she would be behind him. The man looked up in confusion. He was following the girl, but it was impossible to catch her. She was moving so fast that nothing could stop her. She approached the man for a few large and swung her sword at him. There was a cracking sound, and the man felt something very sharp digging into his shoulder. Blood splattered in different directions. The man didn't even have time to realize it. The girl was furious. Her face was glowing with madness. There were drops of blood on the sharp blade of the sword. The girl had literally in one blow massacred the poor mercenary who could no longer resist her. She stood and held her weapon, which had become an extension of herself. She was not in control of what was happening to her, but she liked it. It was a sight that would give anyone goosebumps. The girl stood like that for a couple more minutes, practically motionless. That made it even scarier. Her thick black hair was down to her shoulders and even lower. She looked like some kind of vengeful spirit from the old legends. Han stood a little behind and took hold of his blade. Even he was a little uncomfortable with how strong this seemingly shy girl, who was afraid of everything in the world, had become. The guy looked at her with what looked like open eyes. She instinctively and escaped his magic, and in an instant massacred one of the mercenaries. It was truly frightening. I had to wait a little longer, to wait for the right moment, so to speak. The boy stood looking away. The girl hadn't moved yet. She seemed to need time to recover. Then it turned sideways, but still just as slowly. It was just a horrible sight. You'd have thought she'd gone crazy, but she was partly crazy. The guy approached the heart of the giant, which continued to levitate. They were relatively safe for now. The only thing left was to figure out where the others were, and how many people were hurt. But that wasn't the problem. The main problem was solved. There it is. The treasure of the entire academy. The heart of an ancient giant. The defense was destroyed, and he was able to get it with ease. The guy approached, and literally felt the energy emanating from this artifact with his entire body. About time! I should have put that thing in my inventory. Maybe it was luck again. If so, it's just a beautiful coincidence. However, they had to move back. The guy came up to the girl, who was still not able to come to her senses, and said in a firm voice that it was time for them to go home. So sitting here was not an option. However, the girl had almost no reaction. She stood where she was and did not move forward. The sight was quite creepy. I knew it. Her basic senses are suppressed. She's doing everything based on instinct. She'll need time to recover, but how do we get her out of here? It was clear she wouldn't move without help. He called her name again, louder this time. He needed to wake her up somehow to get her to do something. He'd have to get over her as fast as he could. He had a brilliant idea in his head. If she wanted to kill, she should be given the opportunity to do so, at least for a while. He said they were going to kill bad people. Okay. He hoped inside himself that it would work. The girl looked at him with a look of complete insanity. It seemed to work a little. He was a little uncomfortable with that look. For what it was worth, anyone would start to shiver with fear. But now he had to pull himself together and try to get the girl out of here. He couldn't stay here longer than a certain amount of time. He looked at her with a frightened look. The girl started to come closer to him. He stroked her head. The girl literally emanated energy that was ready to burst out at any moment. He was pouring cold sweat, said that now he would show, where is the right people. The girl seemed to obey him. Although it seems it was not for long. As soon as she heard that she was going to be shown, where are the right people to kill, she had that crazy smile on her face, and it made her feel frosty again. It was an incredibly frightening sight, the guy trying to overcome this unimaginable horror, all shaking with fear. Okay, there's still something that can be done about it. You just have to follow the plan. Don't give her any suspicion that he's going to die, otherwise the next victim will be at risk, by the way, the guy himself. So he told her to follow him. The girl complied, and off she went. There seemed to be only one thing on her mind, murder and nothing else. Behind her lay the dead mercenary. The boy could literally feel that murderous stare in his back. He wanted to walk a little forward, but suddenly he felt someone tugging at his back. He stopped and almost fell to the ground. Didn't it work? The girl held his sleeve. The guy couldn't budge. Her physical strength had increased so much that it was almost impossible to resist her. The girl looked at him with completely soulless eyes. It seemed her human senses hadn't awakened yet, and now she looked like a real monster. He had to be extremely careful with her to avoid being suspected of lying. However, so far so good. She was relying on him, which is a good sign, which means he's managed to win her favor. But it still looks ominous. If he increases trust, he can befriend her as well. This place is safe now. The academy is safe. Bull can handle the others. All we have to do is find a way out of here and move on. But there are some doubts about Keel, and that Julia, she got on his nerves all the time. Meanwhile, the girl was walking behind him, obeying him completely. As soon as the guys exited this room, they were faced with a new threat, so the guy collected me. There were a few more mercenaries standing in front of them. There were too many of them. There were about a dozen of these people. They all prepared to attack. It seemed they had been waiting for them here for a long time. The guy stopped and pondered what they should do next. The situation was getting hotter by the second. The girl looked at him and asked in the same silent voice, "Is this an enemy?" The girl looked at him and asked in the same silent voice, "Is it an enemy?" "Yeah, deal with everybody." A smile appeared on his face. Something fun was about to happen. In fact, he hadn't lied, and now the girl would deal with everyone in a matter of seconds. As it happened, her eyes became frantic again as soon as she saw the opponents. Now she's going to show why she's called a killer. While they were fighting there, the others were trying to clear the outside of the academy. Here, the bodies of mercenaries as well as slain monsters were lying everywhere. Everything. Almost all of the space was covered in blood. Hong and his companions stood together and studied the map to better orient themselves to the position. Everything was so clear here that they didn't even need their eyes. Hong was surprised. This map was incredible. All the key points were marked on it. However, his comrade didn't share his enthusiasm. He still wondered how such suspicious accuracy could be so accurate. However, Jin was of a different opinion. He told the comrade that if this newcomer was an enemy, would he share with them? As long as he didn't see much motive. However, Han said that this one would only recover suspiciously. It's astonishing accuracy, and he was worried about it. But he's going full point, and it takes a lot of luck to prepare a plan like that for such a surprise attack. Though who knows how well his luck points were pumped up. He looked at the map. Their conditions were disadvantageous to say the least. But right now, the initiative seemed to be on their side. Even Song Soo-young's darkness would have a hard time getting information about this attack. But still, how could an ordinary freshman who doesn't stand out like that do it? Meanwhile, Hong was rejoicing in the end. Everything worked out so well. A lot of people are safe now. The guy was over the moon. A real hero. His comrade didn't seem to share that enthusiasm. If he wanted to, he could only see the positive side, but it was far from that. He looked away. Sai Young rejoiced, as expected of their comrade. The girl seemed to be proud of her classmate. Sergei was happy too. Right, as expected from his ball teacher. He's also good at magic. And if he's also good at killing, no, he's awesome as it is. Charles, who was standing next to him, was a little scared. Killing. What? Yes, I think he's amazing. However, there was still one unanswered question. Where did he go? Charlie assumed they had gone to the most strategic point. It would be the most logical thing for them to do. However, the only thing that bothered the girl was, why did they go there, just the two of them? Is that really what you're worried about? Suddenly, Hong appeared from somewhere and cheerfully reported that they had cleared all the places. Moreover, it had succeeded in doing so without much loss of life. Sergei said that there were some dangerous moments, but thank God everything turned out okay, and everyone is safe now. Luck was on their side. Everyone had the same thing, so there was no need to worry. Suddenly, the entire space vibrated violently, the boys straining to keep from falling to the floor. What the hell is going on? What the hell is that? The vibrations are coming from somewhere deep. Ball began to twist his head around, looking for the source of the vibration. The silhouette of a man was approaching them from the side. It was the instructor, a panting man, asking if they were all right. He seemed to be in a big hurry to get to them. What's wrong? The instructor looked extremely worried. The teacher was standing next to him. They had extremely serious faces. Yes, in principle, it wasn't surprising. Everything seemed to be in order, the man asked. Would anyone be willing to help them deal with some problem? Ball looked at them with a perplexed look and asked what kind of problem they needed help with. Let them at least explain what the problem was. It looked extremely strange. The boy looked at them with a serious look. They should at least have some idea of what they were talking about. The instructor said the source of the vibration is somewhere in the research center, so we should head there and find out what's wrong. The boy assumed it must be a heart. Only this single object could have made such a big difference in the stability of the lab. But who could have gotten in there? The instructor nodded. Right, this was and still is the main goal of the enemies. Stealing this giant's heart by taking advantage of the general chaos. They certainly didn't expect it. So it must be prevented at all costs. If they couldn't, the disaster would be terrible. The instructor ran forward. The instructor followed her. Whoever doesn't go with them, let them hide for now until things get back to normal. The instructor threw this as a farewell and ran after the woman. It wasn't over yet. The wind was slowly sheltering the city, however. The academy grounds were still in chaos. There were an incredible number of people here, but the vast majority of them were alive, despite the fact that the setting was gradually heating up. There's only one thing left to do. Find out if the giant's heart is okay. If something happened to it, it wouldn't take long for disaster to strike. The instructor ran first, followed by the instructor. They stopped and stared ahead in wonder. Something had happened there. It was as if they were dumbfounded. There really was a lot to see here. The bodies of the mercenaries who had invaded the academy were scattered everywhere. The whole place was drenched in blood. It was a bit disgusting. The instructor was a little shocked they had dealt with high-ranking criminals, especially since there were over 100 of them here. He definitely didn't expect this from the little students who had only recently joined the ranks of the academy. Khan used all his magical skills to confront these bastards. He was practically at his limit. One end justified the means. High Rim was like a rabid beast. The girl saw nothing around her but endless victims who needed to be finished off with her by the minute. She literally bathed in their blood. She was still just as crazy. It was just the two of them. It was hard to believe. 2 students who had only recently enrolled had taken down experienced mercenaries. It was unbelievable. However, that was how it was, contrary to everyone's bewilderment. Han was an experienced player. He could even handle them alone, albeit with great difficulty. Plus, he had an experienced assassin by his side who saw nothing but victims around him. It was a great chance to massacre everyone and save the heart of a giant. The girl was over the moon. Her eyes were literally glowing. Suddenly, she shifted her dazed gaze to the side. There was another mercenary waiting for his fate. The man stood literally a few steps away from her. He held a sword and shield. I doubt this small weapon could have saved him from a monster like the girl had become in such a short time. The man was trembling. He felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He tried to cover himself with a small wooden shield, but it was useless against such power. The girl rushed at him headlong. She ran and saw before her only a piece of meat to be skinned. She looked at him, and the distance between them was rapidly decreasing. One blow and the man's shield shattered into splinters. He tried to do something else, but it was useless. A second blow, and blood spurted in different directions. The girl literally tore him into small pieces. There was nothing else the man could do. She was too fast for him. However, on the other side of her was another mercenary who had seen it all and wanted to do away with the girl here and now. She turned her face with the same frantic smile. "She'll be right back." With great speed, the girl bounced out of there, and all the mercenary could do was slash the air with his sword. The girl jumped as high as a normal person could go. She didn't care about the laws of gravity or anything else. Han immediately understood everything. He used his magic to give the girl a foothold. The girl bounced off his magic circle, which served as a good support for her, and continued her attack. Now, she would gain more speed, and then no one would escape her. She jumped right at him. The girl had waited for the opportune moment, and now nothing would save them. Seemingly completely lost in thought, the girl's mind was now never to be. She only saw the target in front of her, nothing else. As she did so, she flew past her victim, and in one swift motion, she severed his head. Bright spatters of blood flew in all directions. She smelled blood, stood up and listened. There didn't seem to be anyone else left. She must have killed everyone. The girl stood alone. There were a few drops of blood on her face, and something else. From this angle, she'd look kind of cute if she wasn't covered in the blood of her victims. She shifted her maddened gaze toward the remaining people. The girl was so eager to continue that this momentary pause was like an eternity to her. She knew she would get to the others. It was only a matter of time. No one would go unpunished, and only needed to wait a little longer. The rest of the guys who were left stood there shaking silently with fear. They hadn't expected such resistance. They thought that this girl wouldn't be able to do anything. They did not want to believe that they were about to die. So each of them had the idea that it was better to retreat and save their lives than to pick up their intestines piece by piece. Looks like they figured it out fast, realized they had to run away right away. It would be better to fail their mission and still be alive. The mercenaries began to slowly turn around, each of them realizing that suddenly their lives were the most valuable thing on this planet. They wanted nothing more. They gave a damn about everything. They wanted to get out of the sight of that crazy girl as soon as possible. They could not believe that a man could be so cruel and monstrous. They wanted to hide, run and hide. This they did. The girl stood holding the bloody blade in her hands, and the mercenaries ran for their lives, trying to hide, and never show their faces again. However, it seemed they wouldn't be able to escape so quickly. Han put his hand forward to fire another of his spells at them. It didn't matter what happened. What mattered was that they wouldn't get away. They had their superiority, and nothing in the world seemed to be able to stop them. All that's left is to deliver the final killing blow. Space began to distort everywhere. The guys tried to run away, but it was not their destiny. Spheres of compressed space began to appear, killing everything in their path. The few remaining mercenaries stood in front of the others, trying to recover from what they had seen. Some of them were hiccuping. There were none left who wanted to continue. It was just a bunch of scared people. The others watched as the two guys single-handedly took down an entire group of experienced assassins. And how was that even possible? They didn't dare to say a word. It was something amazing to them. Such a thing simply could not be. Those two were a perfect match. You only see that in the movies. There were drops of blood everywhere. There was a distinct smell of smoke and blood in the air. But nothing. It would be over soon. It was like most of the work was done. Soon, it became known that this whole Balaganza was organized by Nightfall and Shadow Wolf. The information about it, and any related data, as well as the participants, their ages, and all that was strictly classified. So it was almost impossible to find out anything about it. The people were sure that even the Guardians of Korea could not suspect anything, although nothing and no one could hide from their inquisitive eye. Well, we'll have to deal with that later. Since this was a top-secret operation, they had prepared carefully, starting when the instructors were in the meeting room and separated from the academy, but the operations were thwarted. One of the mercenaries, one of the most important ones, just stood there and didn't understand anything. He couldn't understand how their perfectly planned mission could be interrupted like this, and asked, "I don't know, they had prepared everything. They planned the whole thing, and now it's all gone to shit." Like they knew everything? Everything absolutely up to the last moment. And to stop her like that without a single mistake was the work of a professional, obviously. The hooded man stood there watching all of this. He threw his hood back a little. His name was Paul Hockland, the leader of the heroine and top-ranking Shadow Wolf. He looked at what was going on out there, the madness that had been set up by the obscure individuals who had inexplicably found out about their plan and prevented it. This man's code name is Draconia Covered Man, X, who was involved in the attack. He also has a contract with a deity in the sky. This was a colleague of one of the teachers and also his bitter rival. They were constantly competing with each other. Their feud had been going on for years. The man looked off into the distance, where the smoke continued to billow. Yeah, you never know where the plan might go wrong. Okay, no need to get upset. Everything would fall into place soon. But this is something out of the ordinary. It couldn't just happen. The enemy attacked the most important points. It was as if he saw and knew in advance where to strike to prevent all this. And the team that was sent to the engineering research centers was stopped by only 2 men. That's unthinkable. They were experienced assassins. Holland didn't even have time to follow their actions. It was simply incomprehensible, according to the spy report. None of the teachers knew about it. Then how? They didn't have time to prepare them. It was just unthinkable. What was even going on in this place? It was just a decision by the candidates themselves to go there and fight. Then why did they do it? How were they able to resist like that? It didn't make sense either way. Their plan had gone to shit, and now they had to figure out something on the spot, well, or retreat. Killing candidates, creating a general atmosphere of chaos was naturally one cover. The main goal was something else. It was to steal the heart of an ancient giant, but that was a bust. Why isn't everything going the way they planned? It just wasn't mental. In that case, you must cancel the operation immediately. The man pressed the earpiece that had been in his ear the whole time and mumbled something into it. He said they're starting Plan B. Change position now. The two people who were standing nearby nodded their heads, and immediately, dark shadows swept forward. The man froze in place and continued to follow everything with his gaze. We need to achieve at least the second goal. Otherwise, we can call the operation a complete failure. He stood and watched the whole thing with great disdain. He wanted to know who was strong enough to prevent their invasion so easily. Currently, most of the candidates are taking refuge in the dormitory. It was an easy target. All that's left is to find a way in. He wanted to blow this place up. That way, if they couldn't steal the heart, at least they would be able to leave behind more blood. Okay, it's not hard to find the dormitory. It's pretty big, so he'll see it right away. Currently, all the teachers are currently occupied and the dormitory has been left without cover. The center, which is quite remote from this place, it's a long way to escape from there. Everyone is dead, except for those two. It was as if the man had become furious. He thought at this rate he could prove his superiority. For Plan B, he installed on all the corners, so that no one could get in if necessary. Locked in with the monsters, they're bound hand and foot, and nothing can stop the operation from succeeding. At least here they should be able to succeed. Nothing would get him this time. He put his hand to his ear and said that they would move out immediately without delay. Okay, if someone had revealed the basic plan, I don't care. There was nothing to stop the plan. The man was standing on the roof. There are things in this world you can't make stop if you don't know them. Someone jumped sharply to the floor and rested his hands directly on the concrete slab. It was Han. The guy was really tired. He had been running for a long time, so his whole body was starting to cramp up. He was breathing heavily. His eyes were frantic. He wasn't going to run for so long, but he was affected by the characteristics. They extended to him as well. He was even a little scared at the realization that such a powerful fighter was right next to him. All right, now was not the time. Who knew that it was so strong, and that it had such a powerful effect on the battlefield? This was the first time he was experiencing such a powerful effect, he wondered. Why did this happen? This had never happened before. He could feel his entire body literally tearing apart right now. One good thing is that she listens to him almost without question. You could almost say colleague, and the guy even grinned a little at that. It sounded kind of funny. He sighed heavily. His head was starting to hurt. He looked in the other direction. Something was definitely going on. There was a lot of noise coming from there, and it sounded like someone was fighting again. Yeah, they shouldn't have forgotten about the monsters. There were still plenty of them to do something terrible. They dealt with the mercenaries. But what about this sign? Yeah, it was worse than he thought. There was a blocking barrier and a whole lot of monsters. Are they trying to stop us? The boy thought. And I think he was starting to get a little bit of a clue. The two mercenaries who were still hiding their faces were already approaching their destination. And now, nothing could stop them even if they wanted to. The guy realized that he needed to recover. He opened the characterization window to check his condition. He didn't have many points. He should trust his luck. Acquisition. A box of medium-level random potions. A mid-level random potion box was used. Luck immediately reacted to the player's situation. The potion he drank gave him high-quality dragon acceleration. Oh, that's not bad at all. With such strength, he would easily be able to deal with it. The guy didn't quite understand what happened. She'd reacted to the situation? What the hell was this? Yes, this had happened before, but it was extremely strange considering the situation. His quadrocopter circled next to him. He immediately turned to the boy. He turned his head and looked at him in surprise. The device reported in a mechanical voice that the dormitory had been attacked. The boy opened his mouth in surprise. How was that even possible? He certainly hadn't expected such a thing. The boy was far enough away now to get close enough to get there. The dormitory was covered with some kind of weird barrier that wouldn't let anything in or out. There were a lot of mercenaries standing around. Now they were waiting for the moment. Plan B was going to work perfectly. All that was left was to blow the place to hell. The two highest-ranked magic hunters stood here and watched what was happening. This magic barrier should hold. There was anticipation on their faces. This magical barrier is huge! The man looked in front of him at what they had created. And now, something monstrous was awakening in his soul. The barrier was suddenly beginning to collapse. The men saw the walls begin to fall, and now it seemed their plan was beginning to break down. The man thought, despite the preparation, the dismantling process would obviously take some time. Who dared to attack in the first place? They weren't prepared for someone to try to stop such an ingenious and elaborate plan. It just didn't make sense. The barrier had been built for so long, and it only lasted an hour. The man couldn't believe what he was seeing and hearing. An hour? There was another one behind him. Even less than that, he lasted about minutes. Paul stood looking at him with surprised eyes. The man couldn't believe it. He was aware of it. Okay, something had to be done about this. The whole plan was going to hell. It's definitely damaged somewhere on the outside. It's taking longer than planned, but we need to restore the integrity of this fell. About 4 hours. That was simply unacceptably long. Who would dare to destroy the barrier like that? The man assumed that's what you were told was the candidate. All right, we'll just have to see and find out who this kid is. They disbanded them too early. That's what caused the failure. It sucked. When the HQs got back to normal, that's when it all started. Well, we gotta do something now. It'd be a shame if they couldn't pull off the operation they've been planning for so long. What's the point of bothering? They're professionals. They'll just do a quick job and then they'll be gone, right? It'll all work out. The man nodded, of course. He'd prepared everything in advance. Those words didn't sound very convincing. Okay. The others just kept silent. They also wanted to finish quickly so they wouldn't have to be here for too long. There's a surprisingly large number of people here since they didn't go according to plan, so we'll have to improvise. Suddenly, one of the men felt something. He felt like something was happening. Something very wrong, out of place. Well, that would have to be dealt with a little later. It was a feeling that kept bothering him, but he couldn't admit it. One of the men said he was getting nervous. There was obvious worry on the man's face. Paul asked what was wrong. Why was he nervous? The road was closed, and the monsters and high-ranking troops moved to their positions. A man with the sixth sense skill could sense possible outcomes of events. He couldn't ignore his gut, but he couldn't back down either. He felt like he was sensing something not good, something that would definitely hinder them. Okay, he couldn't ignore it. He listened to his gut and realized that something was definitely wrong. The barrier continued to crack, but they were diligently trying to keep it from collapsing. Whatever was going on out there, they had to maintain its integrity. The man looked up, and with a blissful smile on his face said, "It's done!" He was literally excited to put this plan into action. A hole was starting to form here. It was getting bigger and bigger, and soon this barrier would collapse. We're going to have to move too fast from here. Indeed, everything went according to plan. The barrier began to collapse. Now, the city was unprotected. The entire academy was in plain sight. All that was left was to get in there and do the deed. Commence operation! Let's move fast! The man thought that at least this plan should work for them. He couldn't forgive himself for another mistake. Now he would concentrate as much as possible on success. He ordered everyone to begin the operation. The men stood and listened attentively. They were used to listening to their leader without question. Take the dormitory and blow it up! A chill ran down the backs of the men. They didn't expect that they would have to participate in such a dangerous adventure. However, there was nothing to do. They had to carry out the order. The hooded man who was apparently in charge started laughing with rage. He's going to start killing one by one. If he couldn't steal the giant's heart, at least he'd start killing everyone. Suddenly, he heard everything start to shake around him. What's going on? Did the explosion start? But they haven't done anything yet, have they? Had they? It was a little creepy to realize that this plan could go down the drain. A scream was heard that spread throughout the academy. Who could be screaming so violently? The other question was what was going on there. Obviously something terrible. The man looked in the direction where the scream was coming from. They even froze a little for a second. What the hell is this? What a strange feeling. A small shiver went through their bodies. The scream continued to spread, and the men listened to it. It was so loud, desperate, they had never seen such a thing before. Suddenly, however, their main assassin started coughing and slumped backwards. The man grabbed his throat as if he was choking on something. However, at first glance, everything was fine. Then what was wrong with him? The man's eyes bulged, and he tried to gulp air with his mouth. Still, in the end, he didn't have enough strength, and he fell to the ground with a loud sound. The others looked at him with terrified eyes. The man was unconscious. His eyes were white, and he was trying to breathe, but it was getting harder and harder. He was foaming at the mouth. He had gotten a dragon and reached the highest rank, but he was cursed. He was extremely ill at this moment, and it looked like he didn't have long to live. The guys began to look amongst themselves, however, why now? Was he that bad? There was a look of obvious consternation and incomprehension on their faces. He ordered them to get ready. A dragon! No, it's not like a dragon, it's something else. It's like nothing they've ever heard before. The boys listened. The scream was repeated. It gradually turned into a roar. A chill ran down their backs. Who could scream like that? Something was definitely wrong here, that's all. Something was closing in on them. Apparently something very strong but not very big. And now what to do with it all? Scary. Suddenly the guys looked to the side and saw something strange. Something they certainly didn't expect. There was a small creature standing there. She had slightly long ash-colored hair, small hands, and a neat dress on top. Same little feet. Wait, that's a little girl, right? It's a baby! What's she doing here? There shouldn't be children here. However, the little girl was sniffling and looking at them with her big yellow eyes. The guys looked at her. What was the kid doing here? For a second, they thought this kid was even really cute. Suddenly, the girl screamed with all her might. Wait a minute! That was the scream I didn't hear! What a devil! As soon as she screamed, Wilson started wriggling in pain. He felt with every cell of his body that he was about to die. The man was in pain. He gritted his teeth but couldn't say a word. It was as if his tongue had disappeared. The men looked over to where the unfortunate comrade lay. A chill ran across their faces. What just happened? It's just beyond comprehension. Then, they looked at the child. A chill ran down their spines again. There seemed to be something wrong. A very bad feeling in their hearts. It's a dragon! A draconian! It simply defies imagination! The girl looked at them with a calm yet angry gaze. So that's what seemed strange at first. Big eyes. Humans can't have eyes like that. Think already. The man tried to think of a plan to stay alive at least. The dragon's strength is at least. Its magic level can also vary. He looked away, fear clearly visible in his eyes. I wonder if anyone knows what to do with him. Can he use magic? Is there anyone who can handle him? And 98% chance of destroying them. Well, it's a good thing they figured it out almost immediately. A man out of fear. If they lose a bunch of people and 3 high-ranked warriors, Shadow Wolf will no longer be in the top, at most in the top. What? Am I right in thinking you're on the verge of death? You care about rankings? What kind of idiot are you? However, he didn't seem to perceive anything at all. This couldn't be allowed to happen. The man seemed more worried about his clan's ranking than his own life. Okay, otherwise, running away is their only option. Now that's a good idea. His hands were shaking. He knew he was facing a monster capable of destroying their unit in seconds, but so far it had done nothing. The man threw a smoke grenade forward to provide cover. We're out of here! He shouted to his men to get out of here fast. The girl looked up with confused eyes. They disappeared so quickly that she didn't have time to do or say anything. Her big yellow eyes ran from side to side in an attempt to find the missing people. There was some strange crystal standing nearby. It was bright blue in color and glowing constantly. You need to confuse them using the Thunder Curtain and open the escape gate. In any case, escape is better than death or defeat. Forget about your plan, and save your own lives if you care about them. And finally, Holland's backup plan! It's time to put it into action! The man took something out of his small bag that hung from his belt. He swung around and tossed a small red-colored bottle forward. It was some kind of crap, probably potent. It was definitely a potion. It had a very strange bottle. It had a dragon's head and wings on the sides. This mixture is very powerful. It makes dragons lose their minds or lose their senses. Dragon stimulant. With this, they can easily get rid of this girl. The guy immediately disappeared into the crystal. He was in the photo cell at a safe place, and the potion kept flying forward. Soon the man's place was nothing but empty space. There was a flash, and now there was nothing else where Crystal had been. He was gone, completely and irrevocably. And the potion that was meant to destroy the dragon flew straight at the poor girl, who just opened her eyes in surprise at this. It was her first time in this world, and she didn't fully understand what was going on. She was in mortal danger, and only a miracle seemed to be able to save her.